Smoke Over Krakow. Written by Anthony Broadway. Smoke Over Krakow, a Joe Calloway story. Prologue and Part 1, Chapters 1 through 7. Prologue. The Yellow Dress, Burlington, North Carolina. June 2010. Joe Calloway had been home for 9 days and he was already restless. That was the thing about coming back. The first 2 days you slept. The third day you ate everything in your mother's refrigerator. By the fourth day you had cleaned a weapon you weren't carrying and run 6 miles you didn't need to run and called 3 men who were either dead or deployed. And by the 9th day you were sitting on the front porch of your daddy's house on Sellers Mill Road in a t-shirt and gym shorts at 4:30 in the afternoon, watching the heat shimmer off the asphalt, drinking a sweet tea your mother had made you, and waiting. Waiting for something you could not name. Waiting the way a body waits when it has spent 11 months in a place where waiting was a tactical posture instead of a chair on a porch. He was 29 years old. He had been out of the regiment for 4 months. He had signed his first contract with the firm in Virginia 3 weeks before this leave started, and he was scheduled to be on a plane to Baghdad on the 22nd of June. And between now and then was 11 days he did not know what to do with. His phone buzzed on the porch rail. Pop-up barbecue at the Tucker Street spot, 7 p.m. brisket, be there or be square. Big Mo. Joe smiled in spite of himself. Maurice had been calling himself Big Mo since they were both 15, even though at 15 Maurice had been 5'11" and skinny, and the name had not actually fit him until college, when he had grown into it the way some men grow into the names their friends give them. Maurice was a year older than Joe, 2 years out of NC Central, working at his daddy's bonds office in Greensboro, and going to law school nights at Elon, and Maurice had been the one waiting for Joe at the gate at RDU on day 1 of this leave with his arms crossed and his eyes already wet. Joe typed back, "Brisket sounds about right. Where's something other than them gym shorts, Joseph? Lady's gonna be there." "I'm not looking, Mo." "Mm-hmm." Joe shook his head. He set the phone down. He took a long pull of his sweet tea. Inside the house, his mother was watching the 4:30 news on TV5 and saying, "Lord have mercy," every 2 minutes, the way she had been saying, "Lord have mercy," at the 4:30 news for 30 years. His father was at the shop on Maple Avenue where he had worked since 1979 and would be home at 6:15 exactly, the way he had been home at 6:15 exactly for the entire duration of Joe's life. The Calloways were a family of routines. Joe had grown up inside them. He had spent 11 years building a life that was the opposite of routine, and now, sitting on this porch on a Wednesday afternoon, he was experiencing his own home as a kind of jet lag. Everything in the right place, including himself, and yet nothing quite landing where it belonged. He went inside. He showered. He put on a clean white t-shirt and a pair of dark jeans and the brown leather boots his daddy had bought him for Christmas in 2007 that Joe had worn maybe 4 times because the places he kept getting sent did not require brown leather boots. He looked at himself in the mirror in his old bedroom, the same mirror where he had practiced his high and tight in 10th grade. And he saw a man in the mirror who looked like himself, but only partly. A man who had been gone a long time. He drove to Tucker Street. The place was called Maze. It had been called Maze for as long as Joe had been alive, even though the original May had died in 1989, and her son Lonnie had been running it ever since. It sat at the corner of Tucker and Apple in an old converted feed store, with a screen door that slapped when you opened it, and a chalkboard out front that said, "Pop-up BBQ tonight, 7 p.m. brisket, and ribs and sides" in Lonnie's handwriting. The smoker was in the back lot. You could smell it from 2 blocks away. Joe parked and walked. The early summer heat was breaking into evening, that specific North Carolina light at 7 o'clock in June, where the sky goes peach behind the pines and the cicadas start up like a band tuning. He had been in deserts, and he had been in mountains, and he had been in cities where the sky never looked like anything because of the lights, and he had missed this specific peach light at 7 o'clock in June on a street in Burlington that he had walked since he was 9 years old, more than he had let himself know. Maurice was on the porch with a paper plate in his hand the size of a steering wheel. "Joseph! Mo!" The hug. Maurice always hugged like he meant it. Maurice's mama had raised him to hug like he meant it, because Maurice's mama had buried a brother in Vietnam in 1971 and had never gotten over not having hugged him the last time. And she had told Maurice when he was 6 years old that if you love somebody, you put your arms around them every time you saw them. And Maurice had been doing it ever since. "You eat yet?" "No." "Come on, Lonnie made too much brisket on purpose." They went around back. The lot behind May's was a gravel space with a few picnic tables and a string of bistro lights Lonnie had put up in 2008 and never taken down. Maybe 30 people were there. Maurice's crowd mostly, the people they had grown up with, a handful of Maurice's law school friends, two old men from the bonds office who had known Joe's daddy since the 70s. Eddie Ray Linville was there. Joe had known Eddie Ray since he was 14, and Eddie Ray had bonded out Joe's cousin Reggie one Saturday in 1996 and not charged the family for it. Eddie Ray came over and shook Joe's hand with both of his and held it for a long moment without saying anything, the way old countrymen do. And then Eddie Ray said, "Welcome home, son." "Thank you, sir." "Your mama looking after you?" "Yes, sir." "You eat anything yet?" "Just about to." "Get you some of those collards. Lonnie put pot liquor in them." "Yes, sir." Joe got a plate. He got a plate the way a man gets a plate at a black cookout in the Piedmont, which is to say with no shame about it, and he sat down at a picnic table with Maurice and two of Morris's law school friends and a girl named Latrice who had gone to Western Alamance with Joe and who Joe had not seen since 2001, and they ate. The brisket was extraordinary. The collards were better. The sky did its peach thing and then its dark blue thing, and the bistro lights came on, and somebody put music on a speaker. Frankie Beverly, Joy and Pain. And Joe felt for the first time in 9 days that he was actually in Burlington and not just visiting it. That was when he saw her. She came in late. She came in late because she had been at a wedding rehearsal in Greensboro that ran long, and she was still in the dress she had worn to the rehearsal, and the dress was yellow. Joe saw the dress first. He saw it from across the lot, coming through the side gate by the smoker, and his eye caught it because yellow has a specific quality at dusk under bistro lights. It holds the light differently than other colors. It almost makes its own light. And so he looked at the dress before he looked at the woman in it. Then he looked at the woman in it. She was talking to Lonnie. She had her hand on Lonnie's arm the way women do when they are apologizing for something small. Lonnie was laughing. Lonnie was already getting her a plate. She was 22 or 23 years old. Joe would learn later she was 22 and had just graduated from Spelman, and she had her hair pulled back from her face and small gold hoops in her ears, and the kind of posture that comes from having been an athlete in high school. And she was laughing at something Lonnie had said, and the laugh was the laugh of a woman who laughed often and easily. And Joe Calloway sat at a picnic table with a piece of brisket on a paper plate in front of him and felt something inside his chest do a thing he had not felt his chest do in a long time. "Mo? Who's that?" Maurice looked up. Maurice followed Joe's eyes. Maurice took a long, slow breath in. "Oh, hell!" "What?" "Joseph." "No." "Who is she?" "That is Misty Alvarez. She is Miss Doreen's youngest. She is fresh out of Spelman. She is moving back to Burlington in August to start a job with a corporate events firm in Greensboro. She is, Joseph, listen to me. She is a good girl, and you are about to ship out to Baghdad in 12 days, and you are not going to do this." "I'm not doing anything." "You're looking, Joseph." "A man can look. A man can look. A man can also walk himself over to the brisket table and get another helping and not introduce himself to Miss Doreen's daughter 12 days before he leaves the country for a year." "You said it was 11 days. "I'm rounding." Joe smiled. He kept his eyes on the woman in the yellow dress. She had her plate now. Lonnie had given her a plate the size of Maurice's plate, and she was laughing about it, and she was looking around for somewhere to sit, and Joe watched her scan the lot, and her eyes passed over the picnic table where Joe was sitting, and then her eyes came back to it, and they stopped. She looked at Joe. Joe looked at her. It was not, he understood instantly, and against every piece of training and every piece of sense he had ever been issued, a casual look. It was the look you give when you have just walked into a room and the room has rearranged itself around one person in it. And the rearranging has been done by some part of your brain you do not yet have a name for, and you are trying to decide whether to trust it. She trusted it. She walked over. Maurice. Misty. Who's your friend? Maurice closed his eyes for a brief moment. Joe could see him weighing, very quickly, the cost of an introduction against the cost of a non-introduction, and the cost of the non-introduction was apparently higher than the cost of the introduction, because Maurice opened his eyes and gestured at Joe with a piece of brisket on a fork, like he was sentencing him. This is Joe Calloway. Calloway, this is Misty Alvarez, Miss Doreen's daughter, just back from Spelman, about to start her real life. Hi. Hi. Can I sit? Yeah. She sat. She set her plate down. She unfolded a paper napkin in her lap with the small deliberate gesture of a young woman who had been raised right and who was, in this particular moment, performing being raised right because it gave her something to do with her hands while she figured out what the man across the table was. Joe knew this because Joe had 2 sisters and a mother and an aunt and 3 female cousins, and had grown up watching women perform composure in real time when their composure was working overtime. And Joe also knew it because Misty Alvarez, 22 years old in a yellow dress at May's Pop-Up Barbecue on a Wednesday in June 2010, was nervous, and her being nervous made Joe nervous. And Joe's being nervous was a thing his body had not done since approximately 2003. So, she said. So? Maurice says you're about to ship out. In 12 days. 11, Morris corrected without looking up from his plate. 11, Joe said. Where to? Iraq. Army? I was. Now I'm contracting. She picked up a piece of cornbread. She broke it in half. She did not eat it. Is contracting the polite word for mercenary, or is it actually a different thing? Maurice choked on his sweet tea. Joe looked at her. He looked at her for what felt to him like a long moment and was actually 2 seconds, and he understood in those 2 seconds that Misty Alvarez was not nervous because she was unsure of herself. She was nervous because she was about to be deliberately rude to a stranger in a way her mother would not have approved of, and she was nervous about doing it, but she was going to do it anyway, because she had decided in the first 3 steps from the gate to the picnic table that this was a man she was either going to make uncomfortable or going to be uncomfortable around for the rest of her life, and she was going to pick which one. He felt something in his chest do another thing. It's a different thing, he said, but not as different as I'd like it to be. She nodded slowly. She put the cornbread down. That's a better answer than I expected. I had a couple seconds to think about it. 2, I think. That's right. All right. She picked up her fork. Tell me your second best answer to a question. Maurice says you got home 9 days ago. What's the thing you've missed the most that you didn't expect to miss? Joe thought about it. He thought about it longer than the cornbread question. He thought about it long enough that Maurice gave up trying to mediate and got up and walked away to a different table with his plate on the theory that whatever was happening at this picnic table was now beyond his jurisdiction. Joe watched Morris go. Then Joe looked back at Misty Alvarez. She was waiting. She did not look impatient. She looked instead like a woman who had asked a question on purpose and was prepared to wait however long it took for the right answer to come back. The sound of the air conditioner in my mama's house, Joe said finally. The one in the window in the kitchen. It rattles. It's been rattling since 1994. I forgot about it for 11 months, and on the second night I was home, I woke up at 3 in the morning, and I could hear it through the floor, and I cried, Miss Alvarez. I cried at 3 in the morning at the sound of an air conditioner. I have not told anyone that. I'm not sure why I just told you. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, Joe. Yeah. Don't call me Miss Alvarez. That's my mama. Okay. And don't tell me things like that on a first conversation unless you mean it. I meant it. I know you did. That's why I'm telling you. She picked up her fork again. She started to eat. He started to eat. They ate in silence for a long minute, with the bistro lights overhead and Frankie Beverly playing low on someone's speaker across the lot. And Joe Calloway, sitting across from a woman in a yellow dress, understood three things in quick succession. The first thing he understood was that he was going to be on a plane to Baghdad in 11 days, and that there was nothing he could do about that, because his contract was signed and his ticket was bought and his bag was already packed in the back of his daddy's closet. The second thing he understood was that the 11 days he had not known what to do with were now the 11 most important days of his life, and that he was going to spend every one of them in a place he could see this woman in. The third thing he understood, and this was the one that scared him, because he had felt nothing like it on any deployment he had ever taken, was that the 11 months he was about to spend in Iraq were going to be the longest 11 months of his life, because they were going to be 11 months of not being able to sit across a picnic table from Misty Alvarez and watch her break a piece of cornbread in half with her thumbs and not eat it. He set his fork down. Misty, yeah, I'm going to be straight with you about something. I'm not a man who's good at this. At what? At sitting at a table and being honest about what I'm feeling. I've spent 11 years being trained to do the opposite. So if I'm bad at it tonight, I want you to know in advance that I'm going to be bad at it. And I'm sorry about it. And I'm asking you to be patient with me, because the alternative is I'm going to pretend to be something I'm not. And you don't deserve that, and I don't want to do it. She looked at him for a long moment. The look was not the look from across the lot. It was a different look. It was the look of a young woman who had asked the right question on purpose and had gotten an answer back that she was going to spend the rest of her life either confirming or revising, and who was, in this particular moment, deciding to confirm it. Joe Calloway. Yeah. I'm going to tell you something now, because you told me something true. Okay. My mama, who is sitting on her porch on Apple Street 6 blocks from here right now, told me when I was 12 years old that I was going to marry a hard man. She didn't tell me why she thought that. She just said it. She said, Misty, you are going to marry a hard man, and you are going to spend your whole life teaching him how to be soft when he comes home. And it is going to be the work of your life, and it is going to be worth every single day of it. I have remembered that conversation for 10 years. I have not told anyone about it. I don't know why I just told you. I'm not a hard man, Misty. Yes, you are. Joe, I watched you walk into this lot. I watched you eat your plate. I watched how you sit on a bench. I watched your eyes count the exits without you knowing you were doing it. I am 22 years old and I have an undergraduate degree in psychology from Spelman College. And I know exactly what kind of man you are. And I am telling you what my mama told me when I was 12. Joe could not speak for a moment. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything. I'm telling you a conversation I had with my mama when I was 12. What you do with it is up to you. I am going to finish this brisket, and I am going to drink this sweet tea, and I am going to give you my phone number, and you are going to use it, or you are not going to use it. And if you do not use it, I am going to be all right. And if you do use it, I am going to be all right too. I'm 22 years old, Joe. I have a whole life. I am not putting any of it on hold for a man I just met at a barbecue. But I am going to give you my number anyway, because my mama also told me that when the Lord puts somebody in front of you, he does not consult the calendar about it, and I have learned to listen when my mama tells me things. She wrote her phone number on a paper napkin with a pen she pulled out of her purse. She wrote Misty Alvarez under it in a careful young woman's cursive. She slid the napkin across the table. She stood up. She picked up her plate. She walked over to where Maurice was sitting at the next table, and she gave Maurice a hug, and she said something to him that Joe could not hear that made Maurice nod slowly. Then she walked out of the lot in her yellow dress, through the side gate by the smoker, and Joe watched her go. And Joe Calloway, 29 years old, sat at a picnic table at Mays on Tucker Street in Burlington, North Carolina, on a Wednesday evening in June 2010, with a paper napkin in his hand and a half-eaten plate of brisket in front of him. And he understood that the rest of his life had just walked through a side gate in a yellow dress. Maurice came over and sat back down. She gave you her number. She gave me her number. Joseph. Yeah. You know what you're doing. No, sir, I do not. Morris nodded slowly. He took a long sip of his sweet tea. He looked at Joe across the table with the same patient expression his own mama had perfected in 1971. and had bequeathed to him through whatever process mothers use to bequeath such things to their sons. "All right then," Maurice said. "Don't break her heart, brother. I'm going to try. Try harder than that. I'll try harder than that." But 16 years later, in a hotel suite on the 11th floor of the Bristol in Krakow, on the night before Misty Alvarez walked into a marble lobby with a phone in her hand, Joe Calloway was going to lie next to her in the dark with her cold feet between his calves under the sheet and remember that he had not tried hard enough and that she had forgiven him for it anyway, every single time, for 16 years, and that this was the work of her life that her mama had told her about when she was 12, and that he had not, in any of the 16 years, been man enough to thank her for doing it. He was going to thank her, finally, on the flight home from Krakow. He was going to thank her on the flight home from Krakow, and she was not going to be on the flight, and he was going to be alone in row 23 with her bag under the seat in front of him. And there was going to be a small white paper bag from a pharmacy in her carry-on with 2 pregnancy tests inside it, and the rest of his life was going to start over again in a yellow dress, 16 years older and walking through a different gate. But that was 16 years away. Tonight he was 29 years old and the bistro lights were on, and the brisket was good, and Frankie Beverly was playing, and there was a paper napkin in his hand with a phone number on it and a name underneath in careful cursive. He folded the napkin in half. He put it in his pocket. "Mo? 11 days is not enough. It's gonna have to be." "What if it's not?" Maurice looked at him for a long moment. "Then you come home, brother," Maurice said. "Every chance you get, for as long as it takes, until it's enough." Joe nodded. He sat at the picnic table at Mays on Tucker Street for another hour. The bistro lights stayed on. Eddie Ray came back over and refilled Joe's sweet tea without asking. Lonnie brought him a piece of peach cobbler with a scoop of ice cream on it that Joe ate without tasting because he was thinking about a woman in a yellow dress. When he got back to his daddy's house that night, the air conditioner was rattling in the kitchen window. He stood in the dark of the living room and listened to it. He did not cry this time. He did not need to. He took the napkin out of his pocket. He looked at the phone number. He looked at the name. Misty Alvarez. Nah. He put the napkin in the drawer of the nightstand in his old bedroom. He went to sleep. He flew out to Baghdad 11 days later, and he called her from a satellite phone in Anbar 3 weeks after that, and they talked for 41 minutes, and he did not get back to Burlington for another 4 months, and by then she had been moved to a job in Charlotte, and they did not see each other in person again until 2011, and he broke her heart for the first time in 2012, and again in 2014, and again in 2016, and again in 2018. And she forgave him every single time, and her mother had been right about both of them when she was 12. He kept the napkin in that nightstand drawer until his mother sold the house in 2015. It was in a box in his apartment in Burlington when he died. But he did not die for 16 more years. Tonight in 2010, on Sellers Mill Road, 29 years old, with the rattling air conditioner and a paper napkin in a drawer and a flight to Baghdad in 11 days, Joe Calloway closed his eyes in the bedroom of his childhood and understood for the first time in his adult life that there was something he was eventually going to want to come home to. He just didn't know yet how long eventually was going to take. Chapter 1. Smoke over Krakow. The flight into Krakow landed under a sky the color of brushed steel. Misty had been talking the whole descent. Venue logistics, the bilingual MC she'd booked, the awful exchange rate on the espresso machines her client wanted shipped in. Joe let her talk. He liked the sound of her working a problem. She was an event planner with a client running a corporate summit at the Hotel Bristol. He was, officially, her +1. Unofficially, he was the man she called when she couldn't sleep and the man she didn't call when she could. He had spent 6 years in the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment and 8 more after that running protective details for a private firm out of Virginia, embassies in Lagos, oil executives in Bogota, a documentary crew in Mosul that almost got them all killed in a market they had no business being in. He had come home to North Carolina at 36 with a bad knee, a quiet network of men who owed him favors on 4 continents and no idea what to do with himself. The bail bondsman license had come a year later, almost by accident. Morris had walked him through the paperwork at a kitchen table in Greensboro on a Sunday afternoon, and Joe had discovered, to his surprise, that skip-tracing fugitives across the Piedmont used the same part of his brain that had moved principals through Lagos traffic at rush hour. He had been good at it for 9 years now. Broadway bail, 2 rooms above a dry cleaner on Main Street in Burlington, his name on the window in gold paint. He was 45 years old, and he had loved Misty Alvarez since he was 29. They did the things people do in Krakow, wandered the Rynek Główny, stood in the cold shadow of St. Mary's and listened to the trumpeter break off mid-note the way he had for 600 years. Ate pierogi at a place Misty's concierge swore by, walked along the Vistula until her cheeks went pink, and she leaned into his shoulder without saying anything about it. She wore a yellow scarf her sister had given her for Christmas. He watched men's eyes find her in every crowd they walked through, and he watched her not notice, and he thought, not for the first time, about how stupid he had been for how long. That night they checked into their suite on the 11th floor. Misty kicked off her boots and flopped onto the bed, while Joe flipped through channels looking for English. He stopped on a news broadcast, shaky cell phone footage, a marble bank lobby, men in tactical gear moving with the kind of economy Joe recognized instantly. The chyron crawled in Polish, then English, and 6 dead. Robbers at large. Misty sat up. Oh my God. Yeah, that's Joe, that's here. That's Krakow. She watched the loop a second time, hand over her mouth. Those poor people. They just shot them on the way out. Why would you even do that? Because they could, Joe said. He didn't take his eyes off the screen. He was reading the footwork, the stack at the door, the way the lead shooter held his weapon high and tight, like someone who'd been trained somewhere serious. Not amateurs, he thought. Somebody trained these boys. Eastern, maybe ex-military, maybe contract work gone bad. He had run with men who moved like that in another life. He had run against men who moved like that too. Misty exhaled and shook it off the way she did everything that scared her, by getting busy. I have to run down to the bank in the lobby before it closes. Client wired the deposit in zlotys, and I need to break it into euros for the caterer tomorrow. I'll come with you. Joe, it's a bank. In a hotel. I'll be 10 minutes. Misty, I'll be fine. She was already pulling her coat back on, smiling at him the way she did when she wanted him to stop being himself for 30 seconds. Nobody robs a bank inside a hotel. There's a doorman. There's cameras. There's like 4 guys with earpieces in the lobby. He held her wrist, not hard. Phone in your hand, not your pocket. Panic button app open. You see anything weird? Anything. You hit it. I'll come. I know you will. She kissed him quick. That's the one reason I let you tag along on these trips, you know. The only reason? One of 3. She winked and was gone. He stood for a moment looking at the closed door. Then he peeled off his shirt and walked into the bathroom. The shower was one of those rainfall things rich hotels install to make you feel like you're being baptized. He stepped under it and let the water hit the back of his neck. He had a small Glock 19 in the room safe. He had the Polish carry permits, a letter from a friend at the consulate. The paperwork lined up the way a man who used to do this work lines paperwork up. But he had not brought it down to dinner, and he had not brought it down to Florianska, and he had not, God help him, brought it down to the lobby with her. His phone buzzed on the marble counter 90 seconds later. Not a call. The alert tone. The one he'd set up himself. The one she only knew how to trigger one way. He was out of the shower before the second buzz, water sheeting off him, grabbing the first thing he could. Sweatpants, a hoodie pulled over a wet chest. And he was through the door of the suite and 3 steps down the hallway before his body finished the thought his brain was already finishing. Sidearm. He turned around, came back. The Glock was in the safe under his folded jeans. He grabbed it, checked the chamber, and was moving again. The elevator took 11 seconds. He counted them. The lobby was wrong before he was through the doors. Too quiet. The doorman wasn't at his post. A woman in a fur coat was standing very still beside a planter, with her hands pressed flat against her own thighs like she was trying to hold herself to the floor. Joe registered her face, middle-aged, white, Polish, terrified, and registered also in the same half-second The two security men by the front desk standing in the wrong place for security men. Not their posts. They were too far inside. They were trying not to be seen. Inside man, Joe thought. Two of them, at least. The bank branch was off the lobby behind glass doors. He could see movement inside. 4 men, maybe 5. The same loose, efficient choreography from the television. One of them had a duffel slung across his back. Another was walking backwards toward the door, weapon up, sweeping. And on the floor, near the teller line, curled tight as a child, was Misty. Joe was 20 feet away when the man at the back of the stack turned and underhanded something small and dark toward the floor where she was crouched. Joe was running. He was running, and he saw it leave the man's hand. And he was still running, and he was not going to be fast enough. And some part of him already knew that, and some other part of him refused to know it. The device hit the marble next to her and bloomed. It wasn't a grenade. It was something worse, something chemical, something that went up white hot and stuck. The sound it made was almost gentle, a whump, like a gas stove catching. And then Misty was inside it, and then Misty was gone, and the air smelled like a thing Joe had smelled before in places he did not talk about. A checkpoint outside Tikrit, 2008, a sedan that had not stopped when it was supposed to. He hit his knees on the marble. The Glock was still in his hand. The men were already through the side door, into the service corridor, into wherever they'd planned to be. He couldn't hear anything. He could see a security guard's mouth moving. He could see the woman in the fur coat finally sit down on the floor. He could see the place on the marble where Misty had been, and the place on the marble where Misty still was. And he understood the difference between those two places, and his body would not let him stand up. He had buried men before, 2 Rangers in 2006, a contractor he'd run a detail with in Kandahar in 2013, his daddy in 2017. You grieved them, and you got drunk, and you got back to work. That was the deal. They'd all, in their own way, signed it. Misty had not signed anything. Misty had been going to break zlotys into euros for a caterer. He stayed on his knees for a long time. The tears came, and he did not understand them at first because they were hot in a way tears were not supposed to be. Every one of them felt like it was burning a small hole on the way down and pouring something else in through the hole. Something cold. Something he recognized from a long time ago and had spent 10 years learning not to be. By the time the commandant, the chief, got to him, Joe was standing again, standing very still. The chief was a thick-shouldered man with sad eyes who had read a file on Joe 10 minutes ago and clearly wished he had not. Joe could see, in the way the man held himself, that the file had included his service record, his contractor years, the names of 2 firms that did not advertise. The chief had read it and had decided, before he ever opened his mouth, that this was not going to be a normal conversation. Mr. Calloway, I'm going to find every man who was in that room, Joe said. His voice was conversational. I'm going to find them, and some of them are going to take a while. The chief looked at him for a long moment. He did not say, "Sir, you can't say that to me." He did not say, "We'll handle this." What he said quietly was, "I did not hear that." "You did." "I did not." The chief glanced at the marble, at the shape of what had been, at the careful tarp the responders were unfolding. "I am very sorry for your friend." "She wasn't my friend." The chief nodded as if he'd known that too. He looked at Joe for a long moment, the way one professional looks at another when there are things they both understand and neither one is going to say. "You will hear from me," the chief said, "through channels you understand. I did not say that either." He walked away. He could not think. That was the problem. He had moved men through hostile cities for a living, and he had always been able to think. Now there was a sound in his head like a transformer about to blow, and every time he tried to plan, he got as far as the word first, and then his brain did the thing again, where it showed him the bloom on the marble. She had not been just a friend. He had known that for 16 years, and had been a coward about it for almost as long. The deployments had been real, and then the contracts had been real, and then the bonds office had been real, and every time she had asked him a question with her whole face, he'd had somewhere else to be. He had broken her heart in increments, small enough each time that she could forgive him, and she had, God help her, kept forgiving him. They had finally found their way to something real in the last 18 months. He had been in Burlington more nights than he had been out of it. She had started leaving things at his apartment. He had started leaving things at hers. And now his heart was the one in pieces on a marble floor in Poland. And the joke of it, the unbearable joke, was that she wasn't here to see him finally understand. He flew home with her in the belly of the plane. Somewhere over the Atlantic, he opened her carry-on looking for her headphones because he could not stand the sound of his own thinking. He found a small white paper bag from a pharmacy. Inside the bag were 2 pregnancy tests. Both of them were positive. Underneath was a printed slip from a clinic in Krakow confirming what the tests already had. 6 weeks. She had not told him. She had been waiting, he understood immediately, until the trip was over. Until she had him in one place long enough to say it properly. The slip had her handwriting on the back of it in blue pen. Tell him on the plane home. Window seat. Hold his hand first. He put the bag back. He put his head against the window. He did not make a sound, but the flight attendant, walking past, looked at him once and then went and got him a blanket and put it over his shoulders without saying anything and walked away. She was a black woman in her 50s with kind eyes, and she touched his shoulder once on the way past, the way black women touch their grown sons in airports, and Joe felt it for the rest of the flight. Her family received him in Burlington the way they always had, with confusion and love in roughly equal measure. Misty's mother, Miss Doreen, held his face in both her hands on the front porch of the house on Apple Street and called him baby and would not let go for almost a full minute. Her sister Tiffany, who had spent 8 years trying to understand why Misty kept choosing him, looked at him across the kitchen and saw something in his face that made her sit down. He stayed at the house. He had not planned to. He had planned to go back to his apartment off Trail 2 and sleep, and then come back in the morning the way grown men come back in the morning. But Miss Doreen had taken his keys off the kitchen counter while he was washing his face and had handed them to Tiffany and had said very simply, "You sleeping in Misty's old room, baby. Don't argue with me." And so he had slept in Misty's old room, on the twin bed Misty had slept on from age 9 to 18, under a quilt Miss Doreen's own mother had stitched in 1973, and he had not slept well, but he had slept under a roof with other people in it, which was what Miss Doreen had understood without him having to say so. The first 3 days were the worst. The first 3 days were a fog. The consulate called twice from Krakow. The funeral home called 4 times. The corporate client Misty had been working for in Poland sent a delegation of 3 executives in a town car from Charlotte that pulled up in front of the house on a Friday afternoon and stayed for 90 minutes and left an envelope on the dining room table that Miss Doreen did not open until Tuesday. Tiffany handled the phones. Tiffany handled the door. Tiffany handled the church. Joe sat in the living room and got up when somebody put food in front of him and ate it because Miss Doreen was watching, and he was not going to be the man who would not eat at her table. And then he sat back down. On the second night, Tiffany came downstairs at 2 in the morning and found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. "Joe." "Tiff? You been down here long?" "A while." She poured herself a glass of water from the tap. She sat down across from him. She did not turn the light on. They sat in the dark for a long time without saying anything. After a while, Tiffany said, "I'm not going to ask you what you're thinking about." "Okay, but I want you to know I know what you're thinking about." "Okay, Mama know too." "Yeah, she ain't going to ask you either." "I know." Tiffany finished her water. She got up. She put her hand on the top of his head for a moment, the way her mother put her hand on the top of his head, and she went back upstairs. Yuck. On the 4th day, Misty came home. The casket came in on a Delta cargo flight at 4:20 in the afternoon at RDU and was driven by hearse to McLaurin's funeral home on Webb Avenue, where she was prepared by a man named Eugene McLaurin, who had buried Misty's grandmother in 2001 and Misty's father in 2014, and who knew the Alvarez family the way men in his line of work know the families they have served across 3 generations. Eugene called Miss Doreen the next morning at 7 and told her the body was ready for the family to come view if they wanted to. Miss Doreen asked Joe to come with her. She did not ask Tiffany. Tiffany understood why and was not hurt by it. Joe drove. Miss Doreen sat in the passenger seat with a small black purse on her lap, and she did not say anything the whole way to Webb Avenue. Eugene met them at the door. Eugene was 64 years old and had been a funeral director for 40 of those years, and he hugged Miss Doreen for a long time before he said anything to either of them. Then he led them down the carpeted hallway to the chapel viewing room. Joe stopped at the door. Miss Doreen put her hand on his back. She did not say, "Come on." She did not say, "You don't have to." She just stood there next to him with her hand on his back and waited until he was ready. He was ready after a long time. He went in. Misty was in a navy blue dress Miss Doreen had picked out from the closet on Apple Street the day before. Eugene had done the work that men like Eugene do, and Misty looked like Misty, and she did not look like the marble floor in a hotel lobby in Krakow. And Joe stood next to the casket for a long time with Miss Doreen beside him, and he understood, in a way he had not understood on the flight home, or in the consulate, or on Apple Street, that this had happened, and was real, and was not a thing he was going to wake up from. Miss Doreen put her hand on Misty's hand. "My baby," she said. Joe could not speak. Miss Doreen did not need him to. She stood there for a long time, and she talked to her daughter the way black mothers talk to their daughters at funeral homes, which is to say she talked to her like Misty was listening, because Miss Doreen had been raised to believe that her daughter was listening. She told Misty about Tiffany. She told Misty about the boys. She told Misty about the food the church had been bringing. She told Misty that Joe was there with her, and that Joe was a good man, and that Misty had been right about him after all. She said the last part loud enough for Joe to hear. Joe stood next to the casket and cried without making any sound, and Miss Doreen kept talking to her daughter as if Joe were not there, which was the kindest thing she could have done for him, and which she knew. By day 6, the house was full of people. Black families in the Piedmont know how to grieve. The aunts from Rocky Mount came on a Sunday afternoon with 3 pans of food and stayed until Tuesday. Misty's sorors from Atlanta started arriving on Wednesday in 2s and 3s. The neighbors brought dishes every evening, and every evening Miss Doreen set the dishes out on the counter and labeled them with masking tape in her nurse's handwriting. Mrs. Hairston's chicken, Mrs. Jeffries's mac and cheese, Sister Williams's pound cake, so that the thank you cards could be written correctly later. Reverend Aldrich came every other day. The choir director, Sister Hammond, came once. The whole congregation, by sundown of day 7, had cycled through the house on Apple Street at least once. Joe stood in the back of every room he was in. He shook every hand that was offered to him. He hugged every woman who hugged him first. He ate every plate that was put in front of him. He thanked every person who said, "I'm sorry for your loss," and he did not correct any of them when they assumed he was Misty's husband, because correcting them would have made the moment about him, and Miss Doreen had taught him by example, without ever saying it, that none of these moments were about him. On the 7th evening, Morris came over. Maurice came in through the back door without knocking the way he had been coming in through the back doors of Alvarez houses since he was a boy, and he kissed Miss Doreen on the cheek, and he hugged Tiffany, and then he found Joe in the backyard sitting in a plastic chair next to Misty's father's old grill, and he sat down in the chair next to him without saying anything. They sat in the backyard for a long time. It was full dark. The kitchen window threw a square of yellow light onto the grass. After a while, Maurice said, "You sleeping?" "Some. Eating. Miss Doreen makes me." "Good." A long silence. Mo. "I'm going back over there." "I know. After the funeral." "I know, brother." Another long silence. Maurice did not try to talk him out of it. Maurice did not try to talk him into it. Maurice sat in a plastic chair in a backyard on Apple Street in Burlington, North Carolina, on the 7th evening since the worst day of Joe Calloway's life. And Maurice did the thing the Alvarez women had been doing all week, which was to be there in the room without needing the room to be about him. After a while, Maurice said, "Eddie Ray and Devontae coming to the service." I told them. "Okay." "Eddie Ray wants to drive you to the church." "Okay. I'm going to ride with him." "Okay." Maurice put his hand on Joe's shoulder. He left it there for a long moment. Then he got up and went back inside, and Joe heard him laughing with Miss Doreen in the kitchen a minute later, and Joe sat in the plastic chair for another hour before he went in. On the 10th night, the night before the funeral, Joe could not sleep at all. He got up at 3 in the morning and went down to the kitchen to drink water. Miss Doreen was already at the kitchen table. She had her tea and her Bible open in front of her, and she was sitting in the dark. "Sit down, baby." "Ma'am." He sat down. She poured him a cup of tea from her pot without asking him whether he wanted one. She slid it across the table. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to think before you answer." "Yes, ma'am." Was she happy? Joe thought about it for a long time. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "She was happy. The last year and a half, she was happy. We were good. We were figuring it out. She was happy with me, Miss Doreen." Miss Doreen closed her eyes for a moment. She nodded slowly. "That's what I wanted to know," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm going to ask you one more thing." "Yes, ma'am." "You going to tell me if there's anything you ain't told me yet? Anything I need to know?" Joe looked at her across the kitchen table for a long moment. He thought about the small white paper bag from the pharmacy in his coat pocket on the chair in Misty's old bedroom. He thought about the 2 pregnancy tests and the printed slip with her handwriting on the back of it. He thought about how he had not been able to make himself put the bag back in Misty's carry-on after the flight, and how he had been carrying it on his body since Greenland. He could not say it. He did not have the words yet. The words for that were going to come out of him in a folding chair in a tile room in Krakow, in front of a man named Darek, and on the inside of a folded napkin in his pocket on a road outside Sosnoyek. But they were not going to come out of him at this kitchen table tonight. He could not. But Miss Doreen had been a nurse for 31 years, and Miss Doreen had read his face the moment he had walked into her house 10 days ago with Misty's bag in his hand. And Miss Doreen, sitting across from him at 3 in the morning the night before her daughter's funeral, looked at him for a long moment and then nodded slowly and said, "All right, baby. When you're ready to tell me, you tell me. Until then, I know." "Yes, ma'am." "Drink your tea." He drank his tea. They sat in the kitchen in the dark together until the first gray edge of light came up over the houses on Apple Street. The day of the funeral, the parking lot at Mount Zion AME filled up an hour before the service. Misty had a lot of people. Her sores from Spelman drove up in a caravan from Atlanta and stood in the parking lot in their pink and green and held each other and cried. Her clients from the corporate world sent flowers and 3 of them flew in. Her aunts from Rocky Mount came in a church van and brought enough food for a week. The pastor who had baptized Misty when she was 9 walked out to the parking lot in his vestments before the service to hug Joe in the cold, because that was the kind of church it was, and that was the kind of pastor Reverend Aldrich was. And then the bondsman came. Joe saw them through the chapel window before he saw anyone else, because he knew the walk. 3 men in dark suits, license pins on their lapels, catching the gray afternoon light, moving across the parking lot in the loose triangle formation of men who had been at too many funerals together. The big one in front was Maurice Big Mo Pruitt, 6'5" and built like a chest freezer, who ran a bonds office out of Greensboro and had known Joe since Joe was 19 years old and home on leave with a high and tight and a chip on his shoulder. Maurice's daddy had bonded Joe's daddy out twice in the 80s, and that kind of debt does not have an expiration date. Behind Maurice was Eddie Ray Linville, 61 years old, gray at the temples, owner of a 2-county operation out of Alamance and Caswell, who had taught Joe how to fill out a power of attorney form at his own kitchen table the year Joe came home from the contracts and was trying to figure out what came next. And on Eddie Ray's left, the youngest of the 3, Devontae Briggs, 29, who had been Joe's apprentice for 18 months before opening his own shop in Durham, and who still called Joe Unc, even though they weren't blood. They came up the church steps together, and Morris opened his arms before he opened his mouth. "Brother?" Joe stepped into the hug. The hug went on long enough that Joe felt his back stop, trying to hold itself straight. When he stepped back, Eddie Ray had his hand out and put it on the side of Joe's neck the way old countrymen do, palm flat, thumb just under the jaw, and held it there for a long second without saying anything. "We got you," Eddie Ray said. "Whatever this is, whatever it turns into, we got you." Devante did not try to speak. Devante just hugged him and cried into the shoulder of Joe's suit jacket, and Joe held the back of the boy's head the way he had held it once at a hospital in Winston-Salem in 2019 when Devante's mama had passed. And he understood that the three of them had come not because they had known Misty well. They had only met her a handful of times at the cookouts Joe threw at his apartment in the summer, but because they had known him well, and in their world that was the same thing. In their world, a brother's woman was a brother's woman, and a brother's grief was the room everybody else was standing in. Tiffany said, "Sit with us," Maurice said. "Family side, front row." She made room. "You talked to Tiffany." "I talked to Tiffany this morning. She called me at 6 a.m. Maurice's voice did not change, but his eyes did. "She said you were going somewhere when this was done. She didn't say where. She didn't have to. She asked me to remind you of something at the funeral and to remind you of it again before you got on a plane. You ready to hear it now, or you want it after?" "After." "After. Okay." Maurice nodded once. "We'll be right here, the whole way through." The service was a black church service. Reverend Aldrich preached for 40 minutes, and he preached for Misty, not at her, and the congregation responded the way they always did, and the choir sang, "Take Me to the King." And Miss Doreen put her hand on Joe's knee in the front row and squeezed it once. Hard, the way she had squeezed it the first time Misty had brought him home in 2010. Tiffany got up at the lectern and read what her mother had written on a yellow legal pad. Miss Doreen had tried to read it herself and could not get past the first line. And Tiffany finished it in her sister's voice and her sister's cadence, which was their mother's voice and their mother's cadence, and the chapel cried with her. The three bondsmen sat on Joe's left in a row. Maurice kept one enormous hand on Joe's back the entire time, palm flat between his shoulder blades. The way you hold a man who is about to fall but has not fallen yet. Eddie Ray sat with his hands folded in his lap and his lips moving. And Joe understood, in the middle of the service, that Eddie Ray was praying, not the service's prayers, his own, and that Eddie Ray was praying for him, for what was about to happen to him in the next 2 weeks, for what he was about to do. At the graveside, Tiffany came to him. "Joe, yeah, I know you. I know what you used to do. I know what you're going to do." He did not answer. "I'm not going to ask you not to." He did not answer. "I'm telling you, I trust you to handle it." She looked past him at Maurice and Eddie Ray and Devante standing in their suits at a respectful distance. "And I called them because I needed 3 men in the world to know what you were doing before you left, so they could come find you, or come find what's left." "Tiff, come back, Joe." "I'll try." "Don't try. Come back. You hear me? My sister is in that ground, and I am not putting another Calloway-adjacent man in another hole this year. You come back to Burlington." He nodded once. He did not trust his voice. Morris walked him to the rental car after the burial. Eddie Ray and Devante stood at the curb in their suits with the wind moving their ties. Morris opened the driver's side door for him like a chauffeur, and then leaned on the open door and looked down at Joe in the seat. "You ready for the reminder now?" "Yeah." "A woman in this town asked you to come back," Maurice said. "Her name is Tiffany. She has her sister's eyes. You owe her a return ticket. You hear me, brother?" "I hear you." "I'm going to say it to you again on the phone before you get on the plane to wherever you're going. And then I'm going to say it to you on the phone every Sunday until you come home. I don't care what time zone you in. I don't care what you're doing. You're going to pick up the phone on Sunday and you're going to hear my voice. And you're going to remember." "Mo, every Sunday, Joe." "Okay. Say it back to me. Every Sunday." "That's right." Maurice straightened up. He looked old suddenly. Old in a way Joe had not seen him look before. "Now go do what you got to do. And then come home. The bonds office going to be there. The client's going to be there. We going to be there." Maurice closed the car door. That night Joe was on a plane. His old contact met him at a small private hangar outside Krakow at 4 in the morning local time. The man's name was Tomasz Bezdomny, Bez to everyone who had ever worked with him. And he had run a PSD team out of Warsaw for the same firm Joe had contracted with from 2014 to 2017. They had moved a Polish energy executive through Caracas together one bad week in 2016, and they had not stopped being brothers since. Bez was a quiet man, ex-Grom, now in his 50s, running corporate security for a pipeline company by day and pulling favors for old friends by night. He had been waiting on the tarmac for 2 hours. Joe! Bez! The hug was the second long hug Joe had taken in 24 hours, and it was the one that almost broke him. When they stepped back, Bez looked at him for a long moment in the runway lights and did not say anything for a long time. How long has it been since the bank? Bez asked finally. 13 days. You were home this whole time. 11 days. The flight back and the flight here are the other two. And the 11 days. They tried, Bez. They tried hard. Her mother fed me 3 times a day. Her sister sat up with me. Her brothers in the trade rode to the church with me. They did everything 2 communities can do for a man. And here I am. Bez nodded slowly. He did not press it. Then Bez handed him a folder and a black duffel. The chief sent me 3 names, Bez said. I pulled 3 more by lunch. There are 6 men. I have addresses on 4. The 5th is somewhere between Prague and Hamburg, and I will have him by Tuesday. The 6th man, the one not on the news footage, I do not yet have his name. We will find him. You read the file on me. I do not need to read a file on you, Joe. I worked with you. I'm not that man anymore. Bez looked at him for a long moment in the runway lights. I know, he said, but that man is still in you, and he is what we need this week. Joe unzipped the duffel. He looked at the tools of a trade he had walked away from in 2017, and that he had spent 9 years in Burlington not being. He thought about the gold paint on his office window. He thought about Maurice's hand between his shoulder blades through 40 minutes of preaching. He thought about Tiffany's comeback and Miss Doreen's baby and the flight attendant's hand on his shoulder somewhere over Newfoundland. He thought about Misty. He zipped the bag. How long do we have? Bez asked. As long as it takes. Copy. Somewhere a long way away, in a house on Apple Street in Burlington, a sister with Misty's eyes was sitting awake at her mother's kitchen table waiting for a phone call she had told herself she was not waiting for. And somewhere else in that same town, a man the size of a chest freezer was already writing Sunday. Call Joe on a kitchen calendar in black marker every Sunday, all the way to December. Joe started walking toward the car. Chapter 2. The quiet room. The stairs down to the tile room were narrow enough that Joe had to turn his shoulders. He counted them on the way down the way he had once counted the steps of a stairwell in a Lagos hotel in 2015 while leading a principal out under fire. 11. He had counted 11 on the elevator at the Bristol too. He noticed this and filed it away in the part of him that noticed things and would not stop noticing them, no matter what else was happening. The room was cold. Bez had left a single bulb burning over the steel table, and the rest of the room sat in the kind of dark that has weight. The safe house was a closed butcher's shop in a part of Krakow the tourists did not go to, and the tile room was where the butcher had once broken down sides of pork, and the drains were still in the floor. Darek Wojcik was zip-tied to a chair in the middle of the floor. He was 31 years old and he looked 19. His hair was stuck to his forehead with old sweat. His left eye was swollen from however Bez's people had taken him off the balcony at 4 that morning. He was crying before Joe was all the way into the room. Joe understood distantly that Darek was crying because of the way Joe was walking. Not fast, not slow. The walk of a man who had already decided. Also, and Joe registered this clinically, the way he registered everything. Darek was crying because Joe was a black man, and Darek was a man who had grown up in a part of Poland where black men were a thing you saw on television. And Darek's brain had not yet decided whether to be more afraid of Joe than he already was, or to find a way to make the fear smaller by making Joe smaller. Joe had seen this look on white faces in a dozen countries. He knew what it cost him in this particular moment, which was nothing, because nothing cost him anything in this particular moment. Joe dragged a folding chair from the wall and set it down 4 feet from Darek and sat in it. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the boy in the other chair for what felt to Joe like a long time, and was actually 19 seconds. He had expected on the plane that this part would feel like something. A door opening in him, a red curtain. He had braced for it the way you brace for a wave you can see coming. What he felt instead was the cold of the tile coming up through the soles of his boots, and a small clear thought that arrived like a notification on a phone he had forgotten he was holding. She would hate this room. Misty had hated cold rooms. She slept in 2 pairs of socks. She used to put her feet between his calves under the sheets and laugh when he flinched. The thought of her socked feet under hotel sheets arrived in him uninvited and sat down in his chest and would not move. And Joe discovered, sitting in a folding chair across from a man he was about to take apart, that grief was not a wave at all. Grief was a tenant. Grief had moved in and was rearranging the furniture and was going to be there when he came home from work every day for the rest of his life. He breathed out slowly through his nose. "Darek," he said, in English because he knew Darek had English from the file, and he wanted Darek to hear every word the way Joe was choosing it. "Look at me." Darek looked. "My name is Joe Calloway. I was an Army Ranger for 6 years and a private security contractor for 8 after that. I did work in cities you have heard of and cities you have not. The rumors about what men in my line of work used to do in rooms like this one are mostly true, and the parts that aren't true are worse than the rumors. I am telling you this so you understand that nothing I do in this room in the next several hours is going to be improvised. I have done all of it before. I am very, very good at it. Nod if you understand me." Darek nodded. A tear ran into the swollen eye and Darek flinched from his own tear. 13 days ago, Joe said, a woman walked into the bank on the ground floor of the Hotel Bristol to exchange currency for a caterer. Her name was Misty Alvarez. She was 38 years old. She was an event planner from Burlington, North Carolina. She was 28 minutes from the end of her workday. She was 6 weeks pregnant. She had not told the father yet because she was waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was going to be on the flight home the next day. One of the men you were with threw a device at her on the way out the door. She burned to death on a marble floor in approximately 11 seconds. I have been told it was 11. I was not in the room in time to count. I have been carrying those 11 seconds in my mouth for 13 days, Darek. I have been carrying them on a flight back to North Carolina. And through 11 days of looking at her mother's face on a porch on Apple Street, and through the funeral at Mount Zion AME on Friday afternoon, and through a flight back here that landed yesterday morning at 4. I am telling you this so you understand that every word coming out of my mouth in this room tonight is a word I have rehearsed. Darek's face did something then that Joe had seen on 100 faces in a dozen countries. The face a man makes when he understands fully what kind of room he is sitting in. "Please," Darek said, "I haven't asked you anything yet." "Please, sir, I didn't." "I haven't asked you anything yet, Darek." Joe leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands loose. He was aware with a clinical horror that did not slow him down at all, that his voice had gone gentle. Not performed gentle, actually gentle. It was the voice he had used to talk skittish principles through a checkpoint. It was the voice he had used with Devante the first month of his apprenticeship when the boy was nervous about everything. It was the voice he had used with Misty in the dark. He hated in that moment that the same voice came out of him for all three. He hated it, and he kept using it because it worked. "I'm going to ask you questions," he said. 6 of them to start. If you answer them all truthfully and completely, you and I are going to have a very different night than if you don't. Do you understand the structure of what I'm telling you?" "Yes." Question 1. Who threw the canister? Darek opened his mouth, closed it. Joe watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The loyalty math, the fear math, the which of these men will kill me first math. And Joe waited because he had all night and Darek did not. "Cuba," Darek whispered. "Cuba Marek." "Good. Please." Question 2. Where is Cuba sleeping tonight? A longer pause this time. The loyalty math was harder on question 2. Joe saw the moment Darek decided to lie, and he was, on some level, he did not want to examine. Almost grateful for it, because it meant the next part was Darek's choice and not his. "Wrocław," Darek said. "He has a place in Wrocław by the river." Joe stood up. He did not raise his voice. He walked unhurried to the steel table along the wall, and he did something there with his back to Darek that he did not need to do. He was, he understood, performing a small piece of theater, letting Darek hear the sound of his options being arranged. And when he turned around, Darek had wet himself and was sobbing in a way that did not have words in it yet. Darek. Katowice. Katowice. He's in Katowice. Top floor. His girlfriend's place. Marisha, she doesn't know. Please, please, please. Better. Joe sat back down. He waited until Derek's breathing had come back into a rhythm he could work with. The smell in the room had changed, and Joe registered it the way he registered the cold of the tile, as data, as something that would matter later when he could not stop remembering it. He was, he noticed, not enraged. He had expected to be enraged. On the plane, he had been afraid that the rage would crest in this room and drown them both. Instead, the rage had gone somewhere underneath, somewhere structural, and what sat on top of it now was a terrible, terrible patience. He had infinite time. He had nowhere else to be. The world had narrowed to this chair, this boy, this list of 6 questions, and the small white paper bag he could feel pressing against his ribs from the inside pocket of his coat, where he had put it on the plane and not been able to take it out since. She had not told him yet. That was the part that kept finding him. Not the bloom on the marble. He could hold that one at arm's length. He was a professional. He had seen worse fires in worse places. The part he could not hold was the small fact that she had been carrying a secret toward him across an ocean, and he had not been fast enough down 11 flights of stairs to meet her with it. He felt his throat close. He felt his eyes burn. He let it happen because trying to stop it would have cost him concentration, and he needed his concentration. A single tear went down his cheek and hung at his jaw. Darek saw it. Darek's face changed again. A flicker of something almost like hope, because a man who could cry was a man who could be reasoned with. A man who could be reasoned with was a man who might let you live. And Joe watched that hope arrive in Darek's face, and he watched it die there, and he understood, with a flat, sick clarity, that the tear had not softened him at all. The tear had done the opposite. The tear was the rage finding a way out of the structural dark underneath, and every drop of it was buying the men on the list another hour of what was coming. Question 3, Joe said. His voice did not shake. The money. Where did it come from, and where did it go? Darek told him. Question 4. The 6th man, the one not on the news footage. Darek told him. Question 5. Did Kuba know she was pregnant? Darek looked up at him then, confused, and Joe realized, with a small lurch, with the first thing in the room that surprised him, that he had not meant to ask that question. It was not on the list. It had come out of him the way the tear had come out of him, from the structural dark, without permission. I don't, sir, how would he, did he know? No, sir, no one knew. He threw it because he likes, he likes. He laughs about it, about the fire. He's done it before. There was a jewelry store in Łódź last year, an old woman. Joe held up one hand. Darek stopped talking so fast he bit his own tongue. Joe sat with his hand up for a long moment. He realized, trying to decide whether to ask question 6. Question 6 was, what does Kuba look like when he laughs about it? He wanted badly to know. He wanted to be able to picture it. He wanted the picture to carry him through Katowice the way a photograph carries a soldier through a deployment. He understood, holding his hand up in a cold tile room in a closed butcher shop in Krakow, that wanting that picture was the first step across a line he had spent his entire adult life pretending he had not been walking along the edge of. He thought very clearly, Tiffany, Maurice, Miss Doreen, Sunday. He lowered his hand. Question 6, he said. Is there anything you have not told me that I am going to wish you had told me? Darek thought about it. Actually thought about it. Joe could see him going through the file in his head, terrified of forgetting something, more terrified of the forgetting than of the remembering. It took him almost a full minute. The chief, Darek said finally. The police chief. There's a cousin. The cousin took money from us before the bank. Not the chief. The cousin. But the chief knows. The chief knows, and he didn't. Okay. That's all. That's all I have, sir. That's everything. I swear on my mother. I swear. Okay, Derek. Joe sat for a long time after that. Long enough that Derek began to shake. Because silence in a room like this one was its own instrument, and Derek had been in the room long enough to know it. Joe was not in the silence deciding what to do to Derek. He had decided that on the stairs. He was deciding something else. He was deciding whether the man who walked back up those 11 stairs was going to be the man who had walked down them, or somebody worse. He thought about Misty's socked feet between his calves. He thought about Tiffany at the kitchen table in Burlington, saying, "Come back." He thought about Morris's enormous hand on his back through the entire funeral service. He thought about the gold paint on his office window on Main Street. Broadway bail, Joe Calloway, licensed agent. He thought about Cuba Merrick in a top-floor flat in Katowice, sleeping next to a woman named Marisha who did not know what he did. And he felt the structural dark underneath him shift, hungry, patient, waiting to see what he was going to feed it. He stood up. "Derek." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir, please." "You're going to live tonight." Derek made a sound that was not a word. "You are going to live tonight because if I kill you, the part of me that loved her dies in this room with you, and I have somewhere to be in 11 days that requires that part of me to still be alive. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Derek nodded. He did not understand. That was fine. Joe was not, he realized, talking to Derek. "Bez is going to come down in a few minutes. He is going to ask you the same 6 questions in a different order. If your answers do not match exactly, I am going to come back down those stairs. You do not want me to come back down those stairs." "Nod." Derek nodded. Joe walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. He did not turn around. "For what it's worth," he said to the door, "I came down here planning to do things to you that I have done to other men in other rooms a long time ago. I am not doing them. I want you to know that. I want you to know that a black woman from North Carolina you never met saved your life tonight by being the kind of person who would have hated this room. I want you to carry that with you for as long as you live, which I hope is a long time, Derek, because the alternative is that she saved you for nothing." He opened the door. He climbed the 11 stairs. At the top, in the kitchen, Bez was sitting at the table with the notebook open and 2 cups of coffee poured. He looked up at Joe's face, and he did not say anything for a long moment. Then he closed the notebook without writing anything in it. "You didn't," Bez said. "I almost did." "I know." Joe sat down. His hands were shaking. He had not noticed until he tried to pick up the coffee. He set the cup back down and put his hands flat on the table and waited for them to stop. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out without thinking. It was a Sunday. He had not realized it was a Sunday. The time difference meant Burlington was just waking up. The message was from a 336 area code, and it said only, "Sunday, come back, brother. Mo." Joe looked at it for a long time. "Bez." "Yeah." "Remind me." Bez did not have to ask, "Remind you of what?" "A woman in Burlington asked you to come back," he said. "Her name is Tiffany. She has her sister's eyes. She told you she trusted you to handle it, and she told you to come home. And the big man with the bonds office in Greensboro just texted you to say it again, because it is Sunday, and he told you he would every Sunday." Joe closed his eyes. "Again," he said. Bez told him again. The third time, Joe was able to pick up the coffee. "Katowice," he said. "Katowice," Bez agreed and stood up to get the car. Chapter 3. Micah. The drive from Krakow to Katowice was 80 kilometers of black road under a sky that had not decided yet whether to rain. Bez drove. Joe sat in the passenger seat with his hands flat on his thighs and watched the country go past in pieces. A Lukoil station, a billboard for a furniture chain, a long field with a single horse in it standing very still in the cold. He had not slept. He had washed his hands twice in the kitchen of the butcher's shop before they left, once for the cold of the tile room, and once because he could not remember if he had done it the first time. And he had eaten a piece of dark bread Bez had pushed across the table at him without comment. The bread had tasted like nothing. He had chewed it 28 times before he swallowed it. He had counted. Somewhere outside Sosnovich, he put his hand in his coat pocket and found the test. He had taken one of the two out of the pharmacy bag on the plane home and put it in his inside pocket, and he had not been able to make himself take it out again. It was wrapped in a folded sheet of hotel stationery from the Bristol. The stationery had her handwriting on it from the night before. A grocery list for the welcome bag she was assembling for the summit attendees: mineral water, dark chocolate, hand cream, the small honey jars from the place by Florianska. And the test was folded inside the list the way you fold a photograph inside a letter. He did not take it out of his pocket. He just kept his hand on it. The plastic was the temperature of his body now. It had been since the plane. Micah, he thought. He had named the baby on the flight, somewhere over Greenland, looking down at a white nothing that did not look like a country. He had not chosen the name so much as the name had arrived, the way the tear in the towel room had arrived, from somewhere underneath. Micah. It was an old name, a name he had grown up hearing in church, a name his great-uncle had carried and Misty's grandfather had carried, a name that belonged to their people and to the questions their people had been asking God for a long time. Who is like God? He had not said it aloud. He was not going to say it aloud. Saying it aloud would have made it a thing in the world that other people could touch, and he was not ready for other people to be able to touch it. But he could think it. He could think it the way an operator thinks a call sign on the radio when he needs to remember who he is. Micah. Bez glanced over once and saw Joe's hand in his pocket and looked back at the road and said nothing. "Tell me about her," Bez said, somewhere outside Mysłowicz. Joe did not answer for a long time. "She slept in 2 pairs of socks," he said finally. Bez waited. "She used to put her feet between my calves under the sheets. She'd laugh when I flinched. I always flinched." He was not looking at Bez. He was looking at a billboard for a hypermarket going past on the right. She booked all her own travel even when the client offered to book it for her, because she said clients always put her on the wrong side of the plane. She liked the left side. Window. She said the light was better on the left side in the morning, going east. I don't know if that's true. I never asked her if it was true. "It's not true," Bez said. "No?" "Depends on the route. Mostly not true." "Huh." Joe almost smiled. He felt the almost smile happen on his face and felt it leave again, and felt, in its place, the structural dark underneath shift the way it had shifted in the tile room. He breathed through his nose until it settled. She was 6 weeks. I keep doing the math. She would have been 7 on Sunday. She was going to tell me on the plane home. She had the test in her bag in 2 layers of paper because she didn't want a TSA guy to see it before I did. "Joe." "Yeah." "You're allowed to stop talking." "I know." He kept talking anyway in the same flat voice, because if he stopped, he was going to have to start thinking again about the 11 seconds, and he could not afford to think about the 11 seconds on the way into Katowice. He needed to think about them after. He had a schedule. "She wanted 3 kids, he said. "She told me that on our second date in 2010. I told her I was the wrong man for 3 kids. She said she knew. She said she was telling me anyway. She said she liked telling me things I wasn't ready for, so that when I was ready for them later, I'd remember she'd already told me. She told me I was going to settle in Burlington one day. She told me I was going to open a business with my name on the window. She told me I was going to be a father. She told me all of it on our second date." He stopped. "Bez." "Yeah." "She already told me." Bez reached across the console and put his hand on Joe's shoulder for exactly 2 seconds and then put it back on the wheel. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The flat was on the top floor of a yellow concrete building on a quiet street 6 blocks off the river. Marysia Kowalska, 26, dental hygienist, no record, no known association with any of the men on the list. She had met Kuba Merrick 8 months ago at a bar near the university. She believed he was a regional sales representative for a company that imported Italian kitchen fixtures. She was, by every metric Bez had been able to pull in 4 hours, an entirely innocent woman who slept next to a monster. Joe sat in the car across the street and watched her leave for work at 7:42 a.m. She was wearing a pale blue coat. She was carrying a tote bag with a cartoon cat on it. She paused at the corner to put on lip balm using her phone screen as a mirror. He felt his throat close. Joe, I see her. You okay? She looks like somebody. Like who? He did not answer. Marija looked around the eyes a little like Tiffany. Not much. Enough. Enough that the structural dark underneath him noticed and adjusted, and Joe understood, watching a young woman put on lip balm on a cold Polish street, that he was going to have to be very careful in the next 40 minutes about what kind of man came out of that building. He put his hand in his pocket, found the test through the folded stationery. Micah. He's alone up there, Bez said, reading his phone. Confirmed. She left. He's alone. How long until she's back? Shift ends at 4. Earliest she's back in the building is 4:40. That's enough. That's a lot. That's enough, Joe said again. He opened the car door. He took a breath on the sidewalk before he went into the building. A black man in a wool overcoat walking into a yellow concrete apartment block in Katowice was a thing the neighborhood was going to remember. He had thought about this on the drive. He had thought about it with Bez. The solution was simple. Be quick. Be inside. Be gone before the building had time to talk to itself about him. The same calculation he had made 100 times in a dozen cities. He had been good at it once. He was, he discovered as he walked, still good at it. Kuba Marek answered the door in boxer shorts and a Real Madrid t-shirt because he was expecting the delivery guy from the place on the corner that did breakfast sandwiches. He had ordered 1 egg, 1 sausage, 1 coffee, and he was scrolling on his phone when he opened the door, and the door was open and his hand was out for the bag before he looked up. He looked up. He was a handsome man. That was the first thing Joe noticed and the thing that was hardest to forgive. Kuba Marek was 34 years old and good-looking, in the specific way that certain men are good-looking. Strong jaw, dark hair, worn a little long. The kind of face that smiled easily, because smiling had always worked for him. He had the kind of face Misty would have noticed across a room and made a private joke about to Joe later. He had the kind of face that had laughed about an old woman in a jewelry store in Łódź. Joe hit him once, open palm, hard, in the center of the chest, and Kuba went backwards into the foyer of his girlfriend's apartment and landed on his back on the hardwood, and the phone skittered away under a console table. By the time Kuba had air back in his lungs, Joe had closed the door behind him and locked it and was standing over him with the Glock down at his side. Not pointed, just present. The way you stand over a dog you have not decided about yet. Kuba Marek. Kuba said something in Polish. Then when he saw Joe's face in English. Who are you? Who are you? What is this? My name is Joe Calloway. I don't know you. I don't know you, brother. Don't call me brother. You don't know me. You knew a woman named Misty Alvarez for 11 seconds 13 days ago on a marble floor in the lobby of the Hotel Bristol in Krakow. You threw something at her on your way out the door. Do you remember doing that, Kuba? Kuba's face did the thing Derek's face had done in the tile room. The understanding. Different in Kuba's case. Slower. A man who had imagined this conversation as a possibility somewhere in the back of his head every day since he was 19 years old, and had been almost relieved, Joe saw, that it was finally happening. Some men carried the conversation in them like that. Joe had met them in other countries. They were the worst kind to do this work to, because the relief made them brave, and the brave ones made you become things you did not want to become. I remember, Kuba said. Tell me what you remember. She was crouched by the second window. She had a yellow scarf. It was a scarf her sister gave her for Christmas. Her sister's name is Tiffany. Her mother's name is Doreen. They are sitting in a house on Apple Street in Burlington, North Carolina right now, and they are waiting for me to come home. Okay. She was 6 weeks pregnant, Kuba. A pause. Kuba blinked. That he had not known. Joe watched it land in his face, and he watched Kuba try to decide what to do with it. Whether to lie about being sorry, whether to actually be sorry, whether sorry was a currency that worked in this room. And Joe watched the calculation finish and saw the answer Kuba arrived at, which was the wrong answer, which was almost a smile. It was not quite a smile. It was the ghost of one, the muscle memory of a man who had smiled his way out of rooms his whole life, starting to try the trick one more time, before his brain caught up to tell him that the trick was not going to work here. Joe saw the almost smile. His hand went into his pocket. He found the test through the folded stationery. He held it there. He closed his eyes for one full second. Micah. When he opened his eyes, the almost smile was gone from Kuba's face, because Kuba had seen something happen in Joe's face during that 1 second that he was going to spend the rest of his short life trying to forget. Get up, Joe said quietly. Sit on the couch. Hands where I can see them. We are going to have a conversation, you and I am going to be honest with you about the structure of it. I came here this morning intending to do things to you that men in my old line of work do to men like you in rooms like this one. I am not going to do them. Do you know why? Kuba shook his head. He was crying now. Handsome men cry ugly. Joe noted this and filed it away, and would not, he knew, ever be able to throw the observation away. Because there is a sister in North Carolina who asked me to come back, Joe said, and there is a mother in that same house who held my face on a porch on Apple Street and called me baby the day I brought her daughter home in a box. And there are 3 black men in suits who showed up at that daughter's funeral with bondsman pins on their lapels because they have known me since I was 19 years old, and they came to remind me every Sunday who I am now. I am a bail bondsman in Burlington, North Carolina, Kuba. I have a gold name on a window on Main Street. I have a license number I am proud of. I used to be other things. I am not those things anymore. And the child my woman was carrying had a name I gave him over the Atlantic Ocean, and that name is not going to belong to a man who did to you in this apartment what I came here to do. So you are going to live through the next hour, Kuba. I want you to understand that the mercy in this room is not yours. It belongs to 6 people you will never meet. Nod if you understand me. Kuba nodded. Now, Joe said, and he pulled the folding chair from the dining table and set it 4 feet from the couch and sat down with the Glock across his thigh. Tell me about the man who paid you. Start with his face. It took 2 hours and 11 minutes. Joe did not touch him again. He did not have to. Kuba Merrick, who had laughed about a fire in Watch and a fire in Krakow, and was going to have laughed about other fires if the morning had gone any other way, told Joe everything he knew, and then everything he suspected, and then everything he had ever overheard. And somewhere in the second hour, he began telling Joe things Joe had not asked about. A name in Hamburg, a route through Belarus, a man in a uniform in Warsaw who took envelopes. And Joe let him talk because the structural dark underneath him had gone very, very quiet, and the quiet was worse than the noise had been, and he did not trust what he would do if he had to ask Kuba a question twice. At the end of the second hour, Kuba ran out of things to say and started repeating himself, and Joe held up one hand and Kuba stopped. Kuba, yes. Marija comes home at 4:40. Yes. She is going to find you tied to a chair in her foyer with a folder of documents on your lap. The documents are going to be addressed to a prosecutor in Warsaw whose name you do not need to know. You are not going to tell her anything before the police arrive. You are not going to look at her. You are not going to speak her name. Do you understand me? Yes. If you ever, in any future version of your life, contact her or attempt to contact her or send her a letter from whatever prison they put you in, I will know about it within 48 hours, and I will come back to whichever prison that is, and I will finish the conversation we did not finish today. Do you believe me? Yes. Say her name to me once, so I know you understand whose name we are talking about. Marisha. Good. Joe stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob, the way he had stopped in the tile room, and he did not turn around, the way he had not turned around in the tile room, because some things you can only say to a door. Kuba. Yes. His name was Micah. A long silence. I'm sorry, Kuba whispered. I know you're not, Joe said, but I needed to say it out loud to someone, and you are the someone I had. He opened the door. He went down the stairs. He did not count them. In the car, Bez looked at him for a long time before he started the engine. You said the name. I said the name. Out loud. Out loud. To him. To him. Bez nodded slowly. He did not ask what the name was. He understood, the way men who had done this work understood things about each other, that the name was not for him. Where to? Bez said. Joe's phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out. A 336 area code. Eddie Ray this time. Mo said it was his turn last Sunday. Just checking on you, son. ERL. Joe looked at it for a long moment. Then he typed back, with one thumb, 3 words, and hit send. Coming back. Jay. He put the phone away. He put his hand in his pocket, found the folded stationery, found the test. Found, through both, the small weight of a thing he was carrying for a person who would never exist, whose name he had now said aloud in the world for the first and possibly only time. He thought about Tiffany at the kitchen table on Apple Street. He thought about Miss Doreen on the porch in the cold. He thought about the left side of the plane, going east in the morning, where the light was supposedly better. He thought about Morris Big Mo Pruitt writing Sunday. Call Joe on a kitchen calendar in black marker, every Sunday, all the way to December, in a town 8 time zones away. He thought about the gold paint on his office window, Broadway bail, Joe Calloway, licensed agent, 2 rooms above a dry cleaner on Main Street, a coffee maker that didn't work right, a filing cabinet full of court dates, a life he had built with his own 2 hands after he had finally come home from being other things. Prague, he said, the 6th man. Bez started the engine. Behind them on the top floor of a yellow concrete building, a handsome man sat tied to a chair in his girlfriend's foyer with a folder on his lap and tears on his face. And he was, for the first time in his adult life, afraid of a name he had heard one time and would never forget. Chapter 4. Prague. The 6th man's name was Andrei Klaus. 41 years old, Czech, formerly of the 601st Special Forces Group out of Prostějov, dishonorably discharged in 2014 for reasons the file did not specify but Bez was working on by the time they crossed the border at Chichen. Klaus had not been on the news footage because Klaus had been on the roof of the building across the street from the Bristol with a spotting scope and a radio, running Overwatch. He was the man who had told Kuba and the others when to move, where the security guards were, when the response time would be cleanest. He was the brain of the job, or at least the eyes of it. He lived in a narrow apartment in Žižkov, 4 flights up, no elevator, 2 doors down from a bar that stayed open until 3. He'll be in the bar tonight, Bez said. They were in a rented Skoda on a side street with a view of Klaus's building. The sky was getting dark in the way it gets dark in Central Europe in November, which is to say at 3:45 in the afternoon. He drinks at the same place every night between 8 and 10. He goes home alone. He sleeps with a pistol under his pillow. Of course he does. He has a girlfriend in Brno he sees on weekends. She is also not a problem. You've been busy. I have been on the phone since Katowice. Bez glanced at him. Joe? Yeah. This one is different. I know. He is not Darek. He is not Kuba. He is a man who used to be very much like the man you used to be. He will not break the way they broke. He will not break at all unless you give him a reason that makes sense to him. I know. What is the reason? Joe thought about it. He thought about it for a long time, watching the lights come on in Klaus's building one window at a time as people came home from work. He put his hand in his pocket and found the test. He thought about Misty in the lobby. He thought about Misty on the 2nd date in 2010, telling him he was going to be a father. The reason is that the chief sold him out, Joe said finally. The chief did not sell him out. Not yet. But by the time I'm done in that room tonight, Klaus is going to believe the chief sold him out. Because that's what's coming, Bez. The chief is going to sell every one of them out the minute he understands I'm coming for him. That's what men like the chief do. Klaus knows that. Klaus has been waiting for it. I'm just going to tell him it already happened. Bez looked at him for a long moment. That is a very good reason, Bez said. Yeah. It is also true. Yeah. They sat in the car for another hour. Joe watched the building. He put his hand in his pocket. He thought Micah the way he had been thinking it for nearly 2 weeks now. He had not said it aloud since Katowice. At 7:45, Andrei Klaus came out of his building in a black canvas jacket and walked to the bar 2 doors down without looking at the Skoda parked across the street, because that was the kind of professional Andrei Klaus was. He had clocked the car. He had also clocked that the car had been there for an hour with two men in it and had not moved and had not done anything to make him do anything about it. So he was going to go have his drinks, and he was going to come home, and he was going to be ready when whatever was coming arrived. He saw us, Joe said. He saw us when we parked. Good. Joe waited in the apartment. It took him 8 minutes to pick the lock on Klaus's door. Klaus had a good lock, a German one, and 40 seconds to find the pistol under the pillow, the second pistol taped to the underside of the bed frame, the third inside a hollow book on the shelf, the knife in the bathroom, the second knife in the freezer, and the small folded square of cash and false documents inside the back panel of the radio. Joe took the weapons and put them in a duffel and put the duffel in the hall closet under a stack of winter coats. He left the cash and the documents where they were because Klaus would check for those first, and finding them would tell him the wrong thing about who had broken into his apartment. Then Joe sat down in the chair by the window with the lights off and waited. At 10:12, Klaus came up the stairs. Joe heard him on the third-floor landing, heard him stop on the fourth-floor landing and wait, listening, the way a professional listens to his own door before he opens it. Klaus knew. Klaus had known since the Coda. Klaus opened the door anyway, because the only other option was to run, and Klaus was a man who did not run. He came in slow. He had one hand inside his jacket. He turned the light on with the other hand. Joe was sitting in the chair by the window with his hands open on his thighs. Klaus looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the bed. Then he looked at the bookshelf. Then he closed the door behind him without taking his hand out of his jacket. "You found them all," Klaus said, in English, heavy accent. "I found them all." "How many were there?" "3 pistols, 2 knives, the cash and the radio. I left the cash." "You left the cash." "I'm not a thief." Klaus considered this for a moment. "What are you?" "I'm the man whose woman your friend Kuba burned to death in a hotel lobby in Krakow almost 2 weeks ago." Klaus closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, his hand came out of his jacket empty, and he sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, across the room from Joe, and put his hands on his knees the way Joe had his hands on his knees. And they looked at each other across 6 feet of cheap hardwood floor, like two men sitting in a confessional together. "I told them," Klaus said, "on the radio, when I saw her go in. I told them no civilians on the way out. I told them clean exit. Kuba does what Kuba does." "I know what Kuba does. I met him in Katowice on Tuesday." "Is Kuba alive?" "Yes." "That surprises me." "It surprises me too." A long silence. Klaus reached very slowly into his jacket pocket. Joe watched the hand the whole way and came out with a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. He lit one. He offered the pack to Joe. Joe shook his head. "I quit in 2018, Joe said. "I quit in 2009. I started again in 2014 when they took my career from me. I have been quitting and starting since." Klaus exhaled smoke at the ceiling. "You are former military. Army Ranger, then PSD, work for 8 years. Which firm?" "Doesn't matter." "It does to me," Joe told him. Klaus nodded slowly. "I knew 2 of your men," Klaus said. "Met them in Erbil in 2011. Good men. One of them died, I think." "Tucker." "Yes, 2013. Tucker. That was the name." Klaus took another long drag. "All right, so we know who each other are, so we can talk like men. What do you want from me, Mr. Calloway?" "Mr. Calloway." "I want to know who paid for the job." Klaus laughed. It was not a happy laugh, but it was a real one. "You came all the way to Prague for that?" "You did not need to come to Prague for that. Kuba could have told you. Darek could have told you. Anyone in the crew could have told you." "They told me parts of it. I want it from you because you were the brain. You know the parts the rest of them didn't." Klaus considered him. "And what do I get?" "You get to keep breathing." "That is not very much." "It's what's on the table." "Mr. Calloway, I am going to tell you something, because we are former soldiers, and because you found my weapons in 8 minutes, and because I have respect for the way you are sitting in that chair right now. I have been waiting for this conversation for almost 2 weeks, since I saw it on the news. Since I understood that whoever was with the woman in the bank was going to come for us, Because the way the woman was crouched in the footage, the way she had her phone in her hand, told me she was the kind of woman who had someone like you on the other end of that phone. So I have been ready. I am not afraid of you. I am also not unrealistic about what room I am sitting in. So let us talk. Let's. The man who paid for the job is named Dusan Varga. He is Slovak. He runs an organization that you would call organized crime and that I would call a business. He paid because the bank was holding sealed documents for a Polish prosecutor who had been working a file on him for 3 years. The bank was not the target. The deposit boxes were. We were to take the boxes from one specific row. We did. The cash was theater. The killings, Klaus paused, took another drag. The killings were Cuba. Cuba was theater also. Cuba is always theater. Varga did not order the killings. But Varga paid for them anyway, when they happened. Varga paid the bonus, yes. How did Varga know to pay Krakow police for protection on this job? Klaus looked at him. Mr. Calloway, you already know the answer to that question, or you would not be sitting in my apartment with that look on your face. You would be in Bratislava. Tell me anyway. The chief of police in Krakow has been on Varga's payroll for 11 years. His cousin runs the actual logistics. Varga sends money through the cousin. The chief sees nothing. The chief signs nothing. But the chief makes certain that certain reports get filed slowly, and certain cameras malfunction at certain times, and certain witnesses are interviewed by the wrong officers. On Wednesday morning, between 9:15 and 9:50, every street camera within 4 blocks of the Bristol experienced a software failure. That is the chief. That has always been the chief. Joe sat very still for a long moment. You're telling me, he said, that the man who tried to email me a sympathy file on Thursday morning is the man who turned off the cameras on Wednesday morning. I am telling you exactly that. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to kill him. Klaus's voice did not change, but his eyes did. I want you to kill him, and I want it to be ugly, and I want every man on Varga's payroll to understand that the chief was not enough protection. I have spent 11 years watching the chief skim from every job our friends in Krakow do. He takes 30% off the top before any of us see a Zwati. He took 30% off the Bristol. He took 30% off the dead woman, Mr. Calloway. Your dead woman. You think Cuba threw that canister because Cuba likes fire. Cuba threw that canister because Cuba was paid extra by the chief's cousin to make the news big enough that the prosecutor would have to drop the documents from his case for 30 days while he reassessed his sources. The dead woman was a distraction, Mr. Calloway. She was a way to buy 30 days of headlines. The room got very quiet. Joe sat in the chair by the window and he understood, with a slowness that felt like cold water filling a basement, that he had been wrong about what kind of story he was inside of. He had thought he was inside a story about 6 men. He was inside a story about a chief who had killed Misty Alvarez and her unborn son to slow down a prosecutor's calendar by 30 days. He felt the structural dark underneath him do something it had not done in any of the other rooms. It got deeper. He breathed through his nose for a long time before he spoke again. Klaus. Yes. I'm going to need you to say all of that again. Why? Because I'm recording it. Klaus looked at the small black device Joe had taken out of his jacket pocket without Klaus noticing. He looked at it for a long moment. Then to Joe's complete surprise, Klaus smiled. Small, tired, but real. Mr. Calloway, he said, I will say it for you as many times as you would like. He said it again. He said it a third time, in more detail, with names and dates and the location of a particular notary in Wieliczka who handled the cousin's paperwork. He said it a fourth time with the names of 3 other jobs the chief had taken 30% off in the last 2 years. He talked for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and Joe recorded every word of it, and at the end of it, Klaus stubbed out his 6th cigarette and looked at Joe and said, What happens to me now? You're going to disappear for 2 weeks. Bez has a place in the mountains. You stay there. You don't call your girlfriend. You don't go back to your bar. After 2 weeks, you come back here and you live your life. And if you ever speak my name to anyone or come within 1,000 kilometers of Burlington, North Carolina, I will know within 48 hours. And the chief? Joe stood up. He put the recorder back in his pocket. He put his hand on the inside pocket of his coat where the test was, and he thought very clearly and without permission, "Micah, I am so sorry." "The chief," he said, "is going to have a longer conversation than this one." Chapter 5. The Hunt. The chief realized at 4:17 on Friday morning. He realized in the same way that men in his position always realize, through a phone call he should not have received from a man he should not have known, who told him that an associate of his in Prague had not made his Thursday night check-in with another associate, and that the apartment in Žižkov had been searched professionally, and that the searcher was a black American with Polish carry permits whose name the cousin had been quietly working on since Wednesday. The chief sat up in bed. He did not turn on the light. He did not wake his wife. He went downstairs in his bare feet, and he stood in his kitchen in the dark, and he looked at the bottle of vodka on the counter, and he did not pour himself a glass because he understood, with the clarity of a man who has spent 11 years getting away with things and now is not getting away with them, that he was going to need to be sober for the next several hours. He called the cousin. The cousin was already awake. "It's Calloway," the cousin said, "from the file, the one you sent." "I know who it is. He has Klaus. I assumed. What do you want me to do?" The chief thought about this for a long time. He thought about it standing in his kitchen in the dark with his hand on the cold edge of the counter. He had options. He could call Varga in Bratislava, but Varga would clean house. And the first thing Varga would clean was the chief, because that was how Varga had survived for 30 years. He could disappear, but a chief of police who disappears is a chief of police whose face is on every newspaper in Central Europe by sundown. He could try to kill Calloway, but Calloway had so far gone through 6 men without being killed, and the chief was not going to be the 7th man to make that mistake. He could make Calloway run. He could make every police officer and customs agent and border guard in Poland look at every black American man in a wool coat between Krakow and the Czech border, and he could do it within 45 minutes, and Calloway would have to either go to ground or get on a plane, and either way Calloway would have to stop hunting. The chief picked up his work phone. "I am going to issue an Interpol red notice and a national bolo in the next 30 minutes, he said. "Black male, American, mid-40s, military bearing, suspected in the bank robbery on Wednesday." "He didn't do the robbery." "I know. The notice doesn't need to be true, it needs to be loud. By noon, every police officer in Poland will be looking for him. By tomorrow morning, every airport in the EU will have his face. He will have nowhere to be." "And then?" The chief did not answer that question. He hung up. He went back upstairs to his bed. He did not sleep. Joe and Bez were already in the mountains. They had driven through the night from Prague, dropping Klaus at a hunting cabin owned by a man Bez did not name, and they had crossed back into Poland on a forestry road that was technically not a border crossing at 4:20 in the morning. By 6, they were in a different cabin, 4 kilometers from any paved road, with no cell service and a wood stove and 3 days of food. Bez handed Joe a burner phone. "This one works, satellite. Use it once a day, no more. Anything else stays off." "How long do we have?" "Until the chief moves?" "I would say," Bez looked at his watch, 6 hours, maybe 4. "He will move fast. He will use the system against you. Interpol red, BOLO, every border. By tonight, you are the most photographed black man in Central Europe." "That's what I thought." "What is the plan, Joe?" Joe sat down at the rough wood table in the cabin. He put his hands flat on it. He thought about the recording in his pocket. He thought about the chief sitting in his kitchen in Krakow at 4 in the morning, making the call Joe had known the chief would make from the moment Klaus said the word 30%. "The plan," Joe said, "is that the chief is going to spend the next 48 hours making me the most wanted man in Poland. And while he does that, he's going to feel safe. He's going to think the system is protecting him. He's going to start sleeping again on Saturday night. And on Sunday night, when he is at his most comfortable and his most certain that I have either left the country or been picked up, I am going to walk into his house and I am going to have a conversation with him that he is going to wish I had never had." "Joe." "Yeah. He has security. He will increase it." "He won't. Increased security is a confession. He's going to act like nothing is wrong. He's going to want it to look from the outside, like a chief of police on a normal Sunday evening. That's the whole point of the bolo. It's so the world thinks the threat is out there. Inside his house, on Sunday night, he is going to be alone with his wife. Maybe one officer in a car outside. That's it. You are not wrong. I know I'm not. What about you? You are a black American man in Poland, and every officer in this country will have your photograph by tonight. How do you get to Krakow on Sunday night without being arrested? Joe almost smiled, the first almost smile in 3 days. Bez, I spent 8 years moving people through hostile cities without anybody seeing them. That's what PSD work is. I'm not the principal this time. I'm the package. I just need the right driver and the right vehicle and the right window. And those are? You're the driver. The vehicle is something with diplomatic plates that I'm going to ask you to pull a favor for. The window is between 9 and 11 on Sunday night during the Krakow-Lech football match, when every officer in this country is going to be watching a television. Bez looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the wood stove and added a log to it and stood with his back to Joe, warming his hands. I have a friend at the Slovak consulate in Krakow, Bez said. He owes me from 2018. Big favor or small? Medium. Will he move it up to big? For you, Joe, for what is on that recorder, he will move it up to big. Okay. Joe. Yeah. You said Sunday night? Yeah. It is Friday now. That is 2 days in this cabin. I know. 2 days of you and me in this cabin with the wood stove and the food and the structural dark. Joe looked at him. You knew that word, Joe said. You said it in Katowice. To the road. I heard you. I have been thinking about it for 2 days. It's not a thing I want to live in for 48 hours, Bez. Then we will not live in it. We will live in something else. What? Bez turned around. He had a small smile on his face, the kind of smile a man only gives another man when they have been through specific things together and are about to be through more. You are going to tell me, Bez said, every story you have about Misty Alvarez, from the second date in 2010 to the last day in Krakow. Every story, and I am going to listen. And in exchange, I am going to tell you every story I have about my wife, who died of cancer in 2021, whom I have not spoken about to another human being since the funeral. We are going to drink the cheap brandy in that cabinet, and we are going to feed the stove, and we are going to spend 2 days putting our women back together in the air of this room. Because if you go to Krakow on Sunday night carrying only the structural dark, you will not come back. You will leave the recorder in the chief's house, and you will put a bullet in him, and you will not come home to Burlington. So we will spend 2 days making sure that when you walk into his house on Sunday night, you are carrying Misty Alvarez in one pocket and Micah in the other, and the structural dark is the smallest thing on you. Joe stared at him for a long time. You said his name, Joe said. You said it in Katowice. To the road. I heard that too. Joe put his face in his hands. For the first time since the marble floor in the lobby of the Bristol, he cried like a man crying. Not the tear in the tile room, not the burning that he had been doing in private since Greenland. The other kind. The kind that comes out of you when you are with someone who has earned the right to see it. Bez sat down across from him at the rough wood table, and he did not say anything, and he did not move, and he did not look away. After a long time, Joe wiped his face with the back of his hand. Okay, he said. Okay. The second date, 2010, there was a place on Tucker Street in Burlington. He talked for 6 hours. Bez listened. Then Bez talked for 4. Joe listened. Outside the cabin, the snow started to fall, and the world got quiet, and the chief in Krakow sat in his office at his desk and signed papers that put Joe Calloway's face on every monitor in Poland. And Joe Calloway sat in a cabin 4 kilometers from any paved road and told a Polish man about a black woman from North Carolina who had once put her cold feet between his calves under a hotel sheet and laughed when he flinched. The structural dark, for the first time in 5 days, got smaller. It did not go away. It was never going to go away. But by Sunday night, when Joe got out of the back of a Slovak consular car 2 blocks from the chief's house on a quiet street in Krakow, it was the smallest thing on him. Micah was in his right pocket. The recorder was in his left, and Misty Alvarez was walking with him up the street in 2 pairs of socks, the way she had always walked beside him, even when he hadn't yet been smart enough to notice she was there. Chapter 6. Apple Street. Miss Doreen Alvarez had not slept past 4:30 in the morning since she was 19 years old. She had raised 2 girls and worked 31 years as a registered nurse on the cardiac floor at Alamance Regional, and 4:30 was when her body had decided, a long time ago, that the day belonged to her if she wanted it. Sunday morning, the world was still dark when she came down the stairs in her housecoat and put the kettle on. The house on Apple Street was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 11 days now, which was a different quiet than it had been quiet before. Misty had not lived in the house since 2009, but Misty had called the house every Sunday at 9 in the morning, and the house had known her voice, and the house was now a house that did not know her voice anymore, and Miss Doreen could feel the difference in the walls. Tiffany was asleep in her old bedroom upstairs. Tiffany had been sleeping in her old bedroom upstairs for 11 days because Miss Doreen could not be in the house alone yet, and Tiffany understood this without anyone having to say it. Tiffany's husband Marcus came by every evening with the boys, and they ate dinner together, and Marcus did the dishes, and the boys did their homework at the kitchen table, the way Misty and Tiffany had done their homework at that same table 30 years ago. And then Marcus took the boys home, and Tiffany stayed. Miss Doreen made her tea. She sat down at the kitchen table in the dark with her tea and her Bible, the way she had sat down every morning for 46 years. She did not open the Bible. The Bible was open already. She had left it open the night before, the way she had left it open every night since the funeral. On the page she had been reading, when the call from the consulate had come in from Poland on a Wednesday afternoon, and her life had stopped having a before and after that meant anything other than what it now meant. She looked at the open page in the half-light coming through the kitchen window. Romans 12. She had been reading Romans 12 for 11 days. She had not been able to get past it. She had not been able to read past verse 21, because verse 21 was the verse that did not let her past it. And every morning at 4:30, she sat down at the table and she read the verses again, and she did not read past them, and she got up and she went on with her day. This morning she read them again. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. She read them 3 times. She drank her tea. She thought about Joe. She had not heard from Joe since the night of the funeral, when he had stood in her front yard in his suit and let her hold his face for a long time before he got into the rental car and drove away. She knew where he had gone. She had not asked Tiffany, and Tiffany had not told her, and they both knew that they both knew. She was 68 years old, and she had raised 2 girls in a town where black men sometimes went away to do things that needed doing, and she had loved a black man for 34 years, who had once, in 1987, gone away to do a thing that had needed doing, and she had read Romans 12 to him on the porch the night he came home, and she had not asked him what he had done. She did not need to ask Joe what he was doing. She knew what Joe was doing. She had known it the moment he had walked into her kitchen 11 days ago with Misty's bag in his hand. She had seen his face, and she had understood that her daughter had been loved by a man who was about to become something her daughter would not have wanted him to become. And she had hugged him on her front porch and called him baby and made him eat a plate of food and asked him no questions, because asking him questions would not have helped him. Reading him scripture would not help him either. She knew that. But she also knew that the Holy Ghost did not consult her about its timing, and the Holy Ghost had been sitting in her kitchen with her for 11 mornings now, and the Holy Ghost was sitting in her kitchen this morning, and the Holy Ghost was saying to her, in the voice that the Holy Ghost had been using with her since she was a girl in Rocky Mount in 1968. Call him, Doreen. She put her cup down. It's the middle of the night where he is, Lord. Call him, Doreen. He's working, Lord. Call him, Doreen. She sat there for a long time. The kitchen was very still. The kettle on the stove had cooled. Through the window over the sink, she could see the first gray edge of light starting to come up over the houses across the street. She thought about her daughter Misty, who had been carrying a baby Doreen had not yet been told about, in a hospital morgue in Krakow for 2 days before they had been able to fly her home. She thought about Joe, whom she had loved like a son for 16 years, even when she had been furious with him for not being what her daughter deserved. She thought about Tony, her husband, who had gone away in 1987 and come home in 1987 and had read Romans 12 with her on the porch and had been a different man for the rest of his life until he died in 2014. Not a worse man, not a better man, but a man who carried something he had not been carrying before and who had needed her every day for 27 years to help him put it down at night. She thought about her grandson, Micah, whom no one had named yet, but whom she was going to know. By faith was named, because that was what grandmothers did. She picked up her phone. She scrolled to Joe Calloway in her contacts. The contact picture was a photograph Misty had taken in 2022 of Joe at a cookout in Joe's backyard, laughing at something Devante had said. Joe was holding a paper plate. He looked, in the photograph, like the happiest man in the state of North Carolina. She pressed call. Chapter 7. The Confession. The chief's house was a 2-story stone house in the Salwater neighborhood on the west side of Krakow, set back from the street behind a wrought iron fence and a hedge of pine. It had been built in 1928 by a textile magnate who had lost everything in 1939, and it had been confiscated by the regime in 1947, and it had been bought back by the chief's grandfather in 1991 for a sum the family did not talk about, and the chief had inherited in 2009, along with his grandfather's network of unofficial arrangements. The chief was watching the football match on a television in his study. His wife was at her sister's in Wieliczka for the weekend. He had encouraged her to go. The match was Kraków-Lech, and it was a derby, and every officer in Poland with a television was watching it. And the chief had spent the day with the very specific calm of a man whose problem was being solved for him by the system he had built. The Interpol red notice had gone out at 6:40 Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Joe Calloway's face had been on every police monitor in Central Europe. By Saturday evening, the cousin had heard, through 3 layers of separation, that an American matching Calloway's description had been seen boarding a private aircraft at a small airfield outside Brno on Saturday morning, possibly bound for Istanbul. The chief did not entirely believe the report, but he believed it enough. He had a glass of Hungarian red on the side table next to his chair. He had a small plate of cheese. He had his service weapon in a drawer of the desk across the room, because keeping it on his person on a Sunday evening in his own study would have been an admission. He was the chief of police of Krakow on a Sunday night watching a football match. He did not hear the back door. He did not hear the back door because there was no back door to hear. Joe came in through the cellar window on the east side of the house. The cellar window had a latch that had not been replaced since 1962 and a security sensor that had been disabled 20 minutes earlier by Bez sitting in a Slovak consular car 2 blocks away with a laptop and the cooperation of a friend at a Polish telecom who owed Bez from 2018. By the time Joe was on the cellar stairs, the sensor was reading armed and secured to the alarm company in Warsaw and would continue to read that way for the next 4 hours. Joe came up the cellar stairs at 8:53 in the evening. He stood in the chief's kitchen for a moment, listening. He could hear the football match. He could hear the chief say something out loud. Polish, a curse, the kind of curse you make at a referee. And he could hear, somewhere in another room, a clock ticking. He had the Glock in his right hand and the recorder running in his left coat pocket. He had Micah in his right coat pocket. He had Misty walking with him in 2 pairs of socks across the kitchen tile. He found the chief in the study. The chief looked up. For a long moment, neither man said anything. The chief was 62 years old. He had thinning white hair and the heavy, sad face of a man who had been good-looking 30 years ago and now was only tired. He had a glass of wine halfway to his mouth. He set it down on the side table, slowly, without looking at it. Mr. Calloway, the chief said. Commandant, you are in Istanbul. I was never in Istanbul. No, the chief almost smiled. I know. I told myself I believed it because I needed to sleep one night this week. How was Friday? Bad. How was last night? Worse. Joe sat down in the chair across from the chief's chair. He kept the Glock visible on his thigh. He did not point it. He did not have to. "My recorder is running," Joe said. "I want you to know that before you say anything else. Everything from this moment forward goes to a prosecutor's office in Warsaw, whose name you do not need to know, in a sealed envelope in the morning. By Tuesday, it goes to 3 newspapers. By Friday, it goes to Brussels. You can talk to me or you cannot talk to me. But the next 2 hours of your life are being recorded either way." The chief looked at him for a long moment. Then the chief did something that surprised Joe, which was that the chief began to laugh, quietly, without bitterness. The laugh of a man who has been waiting 11 years for a particular thing to happen and has finally seen it walk into his study with a Glock. "Mr. Calloway," the chief said, "I am going to talk to you." "Why?" "Because I am tired." "That's not a good enough reason." "It is for me." The chief picked up his wine. He took a sip. He set it back down. "I have a wife who does not know what I have done. I have 2 grown daughters who think their father is a respected man. I have a grandson who is 4 years old and who climbs on my lap on Saturdays and asks me to tell him stories about being a policeman. I have lived for 11 years inside a story I made up about myself, in which I was a man who occasionally compromised in order to do the job, instead of a man who took 30% of everything that moved through the city and pretended not to see what came with it. On Wednesday morning at 9:23, your woman walked into a hotel lobby. At 9:31, I was sitting in this chair when I got a phone call from the cousin telling me that the job had gone wrong and that there were civilians. And at 9:32, I made the call that turned off the cameras because that is what I do. And at 9:33, I poured myself a glass of wine because I had earned my fee for the day." "Mr. Calloway." "Yes. The morning after the bank, when I read your file and understood who you were, I knew I was going to sit in this chair on a Sunday evening with you across from me. I have known it for almost 2 weeks. I have prepared for it. I have written letters to my daughters that are in the second drawer of my desk over there. I have not written one to my wife. I could not find the words. Perhaps you will allow me to do that before we finish." "Maybe." "That is fair." The chief folded his hands. "Where would you like me to start?" "At the beginning, November 2014. The chief blinked. "You know the date." "I know the date." "Klaus." "Klaus." The chief nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I will start at November 2014. He talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Joe did not interrupt him. The chief did not ask him to. The chief talked the way a man talks at the end of a long marriage to a thing that has eaten his life. Quietly, with detail, with the strange relief of finally being asked the questions he had been answering to himself in the dark for 11 years. He named names. He gave dates. He gave the location of a notary in Wieliczka, the same notary Klaus had named in Prague, and the routing number of a bank in Liechtenstein, and the name of a chief inspector in Warsaw who had known about the arrangement since 2017 and had been bought into it in 2019. He named 6 other officers in his own department. He named the cousin. He named Dusan Varga and a man above Varga whose name Joe had not heard before and whose existence was going to change the size of the file the prosecutor in Warsaw was going to be opening on Tuesday morning. He talked about the bank. He talked about Misty. He cried twice in the middle of talking about her. Joe did not interrupt those either. The chief said in the middle of the second one, "I did not know she was pregnant, Mr. Calloway. I want you to know that. It would not have made a difference. I want you to know that also." Joe did not respond to either statement. The chief did not seem to need him to. At the end of the hour and 40 minutes, the chief ran out of things to say. He sat in his chair and he looked at his wine, which he had not touched since the first sip, and he looked at Joe. "Mr. Calloway." "Yes. What happens now?" Joe stood up. He had been sitting for an hour and 40 minutes with the Glock on his thigh and the structural dark sitting very, very quietly underneath him. And now he stood up, and the structural dark stood up with him, and the structural dark was hungry, and the structural dark had been hungry since Wednesday morning in a hotel lobby. And the structural dark had a face now, and the face was sitting 6 feet from him in a leather chair with a glass of Hungarian red on the side table. Joe raised the Glock. He did not point it at the chief's head. He pointed it at the chief's chest, center mass. The way Rangers are taught, the way contractors are taught, the way every man Joe had ever served with had been taught. The chief looked at the muzzle. Then he looked at Joe's face. And then the chief, to Joe's surprise, closed his eyes. "Thank you," the chief said quietly. "For what?" "For doing it yourself. I did not want to do it myself. I am Catholic. My grandmother would never have forgiven me." Joe's finger was on the trigger. He had been carrying Misty in his right pocket and Micah in his right pocket and the recorder in his left pocket. And he had walked into this house with the smallest version of the structural dark he had carried in any room in 5 days. And he had sat in a leather chair across from this man for an hour and 40 minutes, and he had been fine. And now the dark was the size of a building inside him, and his finger was on the trigger, and he understood, with the same flat, sick clarity he had understood things in the tile room in Krakow, that the next half second was the half second the rest of his life was going to be measured against. His phone rang in his coat pocket. It rang the specific tone he had set for one specific contact in 2018 after Miss Doreen had spent 2 weeks calling him at the wrong times, and he had finally programmed her ringtone so he would always know it was her before he picked up. The tone was 3 notes. It was a hymn he did not know the name of, but that he had heard in Miss Doreen's kitchen 100 times. His finger was on the trigger. The phone rang. The chief opened his eyes. The chief looked at Joe's coat pocket. The chief did not move. Joe took his finger off the trigger. He took the phone out of his pocket with his left hand. He looked at the screen. "Miss Doreen." He looked at the chief. He looked at the phone. It was 4:15 in the morning in Burlington. He answered it. "Miss Doreen." "Baby." He could not speak. He stood there with the Glock in his right hand pointed at the center of a man's chest, and his mother-in-law, who had never been his mother-in-law, on the other end of the line at 4:15 in the morning in Burlington, and he could not, for a long moment, get any words out. "Joe, listen to me. I'm going to read you something." "Ma'am." "You hush, just listen." He listened. She read him Romans 12. She read it slowly. She read it the way black women in black churches in North Carolina read scripture, which is to say she read it like she had written it, like the words had been waiting in her mouth her whole life for this exact phone call at 4:15 in the morning in November. She read verses 19 and 20 and 21, and she read them twice, and then she said, "Joe, wherever you are, whoever you with, whatever you about to do." "Yes, ma'am." "My daughter loved you, my grandson. And don't you tell me there ain't a grandson, baby, I knew. I knew on Thursday. The Lord told me. My grandson is named in the book of life, and his name is between you and the Lord, and I don't need to know it. But Joe." "Yes, ma'am." "Vengeance ain't yours. It ain't never been yours. It belongs to the Lord, and the Lord will repay, baby. He will. He will repay every single one of them, and he don't need your help with it. You hear me? You hear what I'm telling you?" "I hear you." "I want you to come home." "Yes, ma'am." "I want you to come home to this kitchen. I want you to sit at this table. I want you to drink some tea with me, and we are going to read the rest of this chapter together, because there's more in here, Joe. There's a whole lot more in here than just 21. And I am going to need you to help me read it for the rest of my life, because Misty was supposed to help me read it for the rest of my life. And she can't, baby. She can't, and somebody has to." He was crying. He had not noticed when he started. The Glock was still pointed at the chief's chest, but his hand had dropped 6 inches without him deciding it. The chief was looking at him. The chief was looking at his face with an expression Joe did not have a name for. "Yes, ma'am," Joe said. "Say it back to me." "I'm coming home." "That's right." "Miss Doreen." "Yes, baby. There's a man in this room with me." "Mm-hmm. He did it." "Mm-hmm. He's the one. He's the one that did it, ma'am. He set the whole thing up." "Mm-hmm. I have him on tape. I have a full confession on tape. Every word of it. I can take it to the right people, and he'll spend the rest of his life in a cell." "Mm-hmm. Or I can..." "Joe." "Yes, ma'am." "You already know what I'm going to say." "Yes, ma'am. I'ma say it anyway. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." That's 21, baby. That's the one I've been stuck on for 11 days. The Lord left it open on my kitchen table this whole week so that when this phone call happened, I would know what to read you. You hand that tape to the right people. You let the law do the law's work, and you come home to me. You hear? I hear. Repeat it. Overcome evil with good. That's my boy. He could not speak again for a long moment. Joe. Yes, ma'am. Tell that man in the room with you that an old black woman in North Carolina just saved his life, and that he is going to spend every day of the rest of his life in a Polish prison thinking about her. You tell him that. You tell him she said his name in her mouth at 4 in the morning and asked the Lord to forgive him because she could not. Ma'am, tell him. Joe looked at the chief. The chief was crying too now. The chief had heard her voice through the phone. Miss Doreen had not been a quiet woman on the phone in her life. And the chief had understood every word. And the chief was sitting in his chair with tears coming down his face and his hands folded in his lap like a child at the end of a long day. Commandant, Joe said. Yes. My mother-in-law's name is Doreen Alvarez. She is 68 years old. She is a retired nurse. She lives in Burlington, North Carolina. She just saved your life on the telephone. She wants you to know that she said your name in her mouth at 4 in the morning today and asked the Lord to forgive you because she could not. The chief put his face in his hands. He said something in Polish that Joe did not understand. He said it 3 times. Then he said in English, "Tell her I am not worth it." She knows, Joe said. Joe? Yes, ma'am. I'm gonna let you go. You finish what you're doing. You finish it the right way. You hand that tape over and you come home. Yes, ma'am. I love you, baby. I love you, Miss Doreen. She hung up. Joe stood in the chief's study for a long moment, with the phone in his left hand and the Glock in his right. He put the Glock back in its holster under his coat. He took the recorder out of his left pocket. It had been running the entire phone call. It was still running. He did not stop it. He looked at the chief. I'm leaving now, Joe said. You're going to sit in that chair for the next 40 minutes. After 40 minutes, you are going to call your wife and tell her you love her. After you talk to your wife, you are going to call your daughters and tell them you love them. After you talk to your daughters, you are going to call the prosecutor in Warsaw, whose name I'm about to write on this piece of paper, and you are going to tell him exactly what you just told me, and you are going to surrender to him at his office at 9 in the morning. If you do not do this, the recording I have in my pocket goes to every newspaper in Central Europe by Wednesday morning, and your daughters find out from the front page of Gazeta Wyborcza what their father has been for the last 11 years. If you do this, the recording still goes to the prosecutor, but it goes from a man who is already in custody and who has already begun cooperating, and your daughters get to hear it from your mouth before they hear it from anybody else. Do you understand the choice I'm giving you? I understand. Commandant. Yes. Look at me. The chief looked at him. You are alive tonight because of Doreen Alvarez. Not because of me. Not because of mercy. Not because of anything you did. You are alive because a 68-year-old black woman from North Carolina read 3 verses of scripture at her kitchen table at 4:15 in the morning. I want you to think about that for the rest of your life. I want you to think about her face. You will never see her face. I am not going to send you a photograph, but I want you to imagine her every day for as many days as you have left, sitting at a kitchen table in a town you have never been to, reading the Bible alone because her daughter is dead. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes. Say it back. Doreen Alvarez. Good. Joe wrote a name on a slip of paper and a phone number under it, and he put the paper on the chief's desk. He walked out of the study. He walked down the hallway. He walked through the kitchen. He went down the cellar stairs and out through the cellar window and across the back garden and through the hedge of pine and onto the quiet street where Bez was waiting for him with the engine off and the lights off 2 blocks down. He got in the car. He closed the door. It's done, he said. He's alive. He's alive. He's going to surrender in the morning. The recording goes to Warsaw tonight. Bez looked at him for a long moment. Joe. Yeah. What happened in there? Miss Doreen called me. Bez closed his eyes. He nodded slowly. He started the engine. I want to meet that woman someday, Bez said. You will. Coda of Burlington. Joe landed at Raleigh-Durham on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of December. It was 41 degrees in North Carolina, and the sky was the color of wet cement, and he stood in the long-term parking lot for a long moment with his duffel at his feet and looked at his own truck, a 2019 F-150, gold paint, Broadway bail on the side and script, and he could not for a moment remember how to put a key in a door. The recording had gone to Warsaw the same night. The prosecutor's office had received it at 6:20 Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the chief had surrendered himself, exactly as Joe had told him to, and had begun cooperating in full. By Tuesday evening, the cousin had been arrested in Wieliczka. By Wednesday morning, the chief inspector in Warsaw was in custody, and so were 3 of the 6 officers in the Kraków department, and a Slovak prosecutor in Bratislava was preparing paperwork on Dusan Varga that was going to take 18 months to resolve, and that was going to take down, in the end, the largest piece of organized crime in Central Europe in the last 20 years. None of that had Joe Calloway's name attached to it. Bez had made sure of that. The recording had arrived at the Warsaw prosecutor's office anonymously on an encrypted drive, accompanied by a letter that had been typed on a typewriter in a Slovak consulate and that had not contained a single fingerprint. Joe had been on a plane out of Vienna on Tuesday morning under his own name. There had been no red notice anymore. The chief had rescinded it from his cell on Monday afternoon as part of his cooperation agreement. Joe drove east on a 40 toward Burlington. He had not slept on the plane. He had slept 4 hours in the cabin on Sunday night and 3 hours in a hotel in Vienna on Monday night, and the body was the body. The body would sleep when he got home, and not before. He took the exit at Mabon. He drove through downtown Burlington with his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, like a teenager who had just gotten his license. He passed his own office on Main Street. The gold letters in the window, the dry cleaner downstairs with its blinking sign. And he did not stop. He kept driving. He turned onto Apple Street at 4:18 in the afternoon. Miss Doreen was on the front porch. She had a quilt around her shoulders against the cold and a cup of tea in her hands. Tiffany was in the chair next to her. Maurice was on the top step in his suit. Joe did not know how Morris had known what day he was coming home, but Morris had known, because Morris was Morris. Eddie Ray was leaning against the porch rail with his arms folded. Devante was sitting on the bottom step with his head in his hands, and Joe understood, walking up the driveway, that Devante had been crying and was trying not to be seen crying, and Joe loved him for both. Miss Doreen stood up. Joe came up the walk. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at her. He did not have words. She came down the steps and put both her hands on his face the way she had on Apple Street 11 days ago, and she looked at him for a long moment, and she said very quietly, "Welcome home, baby." He started to cry. She held his face the whole time. She did not let go. Morris came down the steps and put his enormous hand between Joe's shoulder blades, palm flat, the way he had at the funeral, and Tiffany came down behind him and put her arms around him from the side, and Eddie Ray came down with his hand on the back of Joe's neck, and Devante stood up and hugged him from the front, and Joe stood in the driveway of a house on Apple Street in Burlington, North Carolina, at 4:19 in the afternoon in December, with 5 people holding him up, and he understood that the structural dark was still inside him, and was always going to be inside him, and was the size this afternoon of a single grain of sand at the bottom of an ocean. After a long time, Miss Doreen stepped back. She took his hand. "Come on in the house," she said. "Tea's hot." "Yes, ma'am." "You eatin'?" "No, ma'am." "Tiffany made macaroni and cheese." "Yes, ma'am." "You gonna eat 2 helpings?" "Yes, ma'am." He went up the steps. Maurice's hand stayed on his back. The screen door closed behind them. In Joe's right coat pocket, inside a folded sheet of hotel stationery from the Hotel Bristol, was a pregnancy test from a pharmacy in Krakow that he was going to keep in the drawer of his bedside table in Burlington for the rest of his life, beside a photograph of a black woman in a yellow scarf laughing at something he had said in 2010. Her name was Misty Alvarez. His name was Micah. And every Sunday for the rest of Joe Calloway's life, at 11 in the morning, his phone was going to ring with a 336 area code. And a man the size of a chest freezer was going to say, "Come back, brother." And Joe was going to say, "I'm home, Mo." And Maurice was going to say, "I know, Joe, but say it anyway." And Joe was going to say it every Sunday for the rest of his life. End of part 1. Surinanon.